Welcome, wrestling fans, to the Pro Wrestle Machine. Let's jump right into it. October 2, 2000 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Disappointing WCW ratings, WWF Unforgiven reviewed, and more. By Dave Meltzer. Whatever changes in the landscape temporarily that would result from the WWF going to a lower-rated network appear to have been overstated. It was thought that this would be the week for WCW to capitalize, as viewers, used to WWF on Monday nights, would switch to WCW when finding other programming on the USA Network. Even though, due to the court decision coming in late and Viacom not getting nearly the amount of publicity they had planned to hype the debut of Raw, the fact is WWF was able to push it all week on its own programming. There was still more advertising for Raw over the weekend mainstream than ever before. And the return of Steve Austin didn't hurt. The result was a number well under what was the Raw average, but had to be considered a good sign overall since it was better than most had predicted for the first show on the new station without nearly the promotion they had originally planned for. It was a figure that would have been considered a major disappointment had it been for Austin's return on the USA Network. But overall the WWF had to breathe a sigh of relief when the number held up relatively well and WCW seemingly gained very little. The numbers put an exclamation point on contradicting the theory WCW has been going on for months. Wait until WWF goes to TNN. That's when the gap will close. As it turns out, the move may be worth a few tenths of a point swing vote, a number that will get smaller over the next few weeks as WWF fans get used to TNN as their station of choice, but in the grand scheme of things, the landscape of Monday Night Wrestling isn't changing one iota. With the monster of the Olympics, which did better than a 20 rating in the metered markets, leading to one of the lowest rated Monday Night Football games in the history of the show, Indianapolis Colts vs. Jacksonville Jaguars at 10.43 and an 18 share, Raw became the most watched TV show in the 17-year history of TNN, with 7.14 million viewers, which translates into a 5.44 rating, 5.17 first hour, 5.70 second hour, and an 8.1 share, slightly down from the 5.71 rating the show drew the previous week. Nitro drew a 2.87 rating, 3.23 first hour, 2.50 second hour, and a 4.2 share, up only slightly from 2.75 the previous week. Nitro, even against the Olympics, is doing stronger in the unopposed first hour than it had been doing even a month ago, but whatever gains in TV ratings haven't translated into any other aspects of its business. There certainly is an internal feeling that Russo is on shaky ground, with a belief he himself is more aware of it than anyone, and thus has booked everything around himself as the focal performer on the show to increase his value while he still has full creative control. That first hour is key, because that has nothing to do with Raw being out of its time slot for 2 weeks, with a football factor since the game starts during the second hour of Nitro. It should be noted that Raw tried to put on a monster show for its debut, featuring the return of Austin, who was featured throughout a Rock vs. Benoit title match and Edge and Christian vs. Hardy's ladder match. Nitro went in a completely different direction with a Booker T vs. Russo title match, an unadvertised Goldberg vs. Scott Steiner cage match, which bombed in the ratings, and a bikini contest, which drew a strong rating but was a total disaster as far as entertainment and execution. Perhaps the biggest surprise of the week as it regarded television was that ECW, scheduled to be cancelled by TNN on September 22 due to its exclusive contract with WWF, got a stay of execution from a proclamation at the last minute from Governor McMahon. McMahon agreed to allow ECW to stay on TNN through the end of the year, with no real explanation given as to why. ECW has the option to leave before that time if the company makes a deal elsewhere, or if the company doesn't make a deal with TNN. However, whatever help ECW is going to get from TNN's higher profile can't be any sort of promotion, since during the initial Raw, which would be the prime time to hype the show, there were no ads for ECW. Nor were there any ads for Roller Jam, Friday Night Thrill Zone, or for that matter, Superstars and Livewire. Many of the regular WWF sponsors didn't seem to be around either, replaced by TNN house ads trying to get the network over with a pop catchphrase in ad nauseum ads. ECW itself remains in serious financial worries. Over the weekend, the wrestlers, who hadn't been paid in 4 weeks, were given checks, but only for a usual 2-week pay period. Everyone is behind 4 weeks in pay since there was another missed pay period several weeks back that has yet to be made up for. It isn't as bad as it was last year before the TNN deal and the Acclaim deal were struck, giving the company added hope. TNN, and a strong cash infusion to pay off bills. Acclaim, where checks were bouncing left and right, But the wrestlers were also told when there were no checks after the Mississauga show that the checks would be FedEx late in the week after the gate money from that show was transferred to the ECW bank account after the currency changed over. That never happened, and the house shows that week were cancelled, which hurt the wrestlers working on a nightly deal. Many of the wrestlers, including some of the top names, have contacted WCW, and no doubt WWF, about getting in because of the financial problems and growing lack of confidence. Heyman, who said that the TNN show might not even air on September 29th, that hopeful he is of making a deal quickly, is going to have to produce a USA Network deal or confidence in the future of the company is going to greatly diminish. There is said to be no definite time slot planned for a proposed 2-hour show, which had not been approved by Barry Diller, most likely on a Saturday either late night, or perhaps in the old WCW Saturday night time slot of 6 to 8 p.m. There are questions that remain regarding the WWF on TSN and TNN. On September 25th, TNN ran a replay of Raw, which drew a 1.4, immediately after the conclusion of the live show. While some TV listings did have the Raw replay, the majority listed the TV series Martial Law, which didn't air. According to Vince McMahon's office, it had not been decided whether this was a one-time deal or not, but McMahon is said to have presumed it was unlikely to be permanent. The plan on the first week was to do it to help launch the new show, and TNN is interested in replaying Raw regularly at some point, but all the details haven't been worked out. Raw also aired on TNN in Canada. This is only what I would call an educated presumption on our part, which could be wrong, and that is that the TNN feed into Canada will be blocked for Raw when Raw airs at the same time on TSN, which owns the Canadian rights to the show. McMahon's office stated that would be the case, but presumably because TSN was airing other sports coverage in the Raw time slot, it didn't duplicate the feed and TNN aired it as it. The general consensus was that Nitro, which drew poorly at the Nassau Coliseum, with virtually no sales at all in the final week, was a huge disappointment and a very bad show, which did nothing to build up any matches for the next pay-per-view. Raw was presented to be a blow-away show, and the star power of Austin was there, and it's something new again. The show does seem to need a format change, as the 23-minute interview opened featuring Austin didn't beat WCW's bikini contest that badly, the closest margin for any segment dating back several months. Raw picked up greatly after Nitro went off the air, growing more than a full rating point, then faltered significantly for a segment that featured X-Pac vs. Jericho, a Rock interview, China's Playboy photos, and Guerrero vs. Venus, dropping nearly 500,000 viewers at an unopposed time period. It never fully recovered, with The Rock vs. Benoit main event doing a 5.91 overrun, a full point and a half below what the average overrun was doing on USA. Even though wrestling fans will become accustomed within a few weeks to the new station, there will also not be nearly the hype mainstream because of advertising buys. The ads regarding the new time slot will continue for a few more weeks, and Austin doesn't always come back. Realistically, there is going to be a drop from the USA Network levels simply by going to a weaker station, but the drop may not be as much as feared, and certainly the idea that the station switch was going to put WCW back in the game seems to be a faulty theory. Over the head-to-head quarters, Raw opened at 4.81, Austin, Foley, Benoit and Angle interview, to 3.11 bikini contest, Goldberg Steiner Angle. Raw grew to 5.48. Opening talking continued with Austin stunning Angle and Benoit plus Kane vs. Rikishi, to 2.17 Goldberg vs. Steiner cage match, Jarrett vs. Rection. Raw drew a 5.34, Taz vs. Bubba plus backstage vignettes with Austin and Taker and Edge and Christian and Foley, to 2.10, Sting vs. Storm, David Flair on the loose, and finally Raw at 5.01, Edge and Christian vs. Hardys, to 2.68, Booker vs. Russo. Rulon Gardner of the United States scored what would have to go down in history as the greatest win in the history of American wrestling when he ended the 15-year winning streak of Alexander Karelin to win the gold medal in Greco-Roman wrestling in the super heavyweight division by a 1-0 score in overtime on September 27 in Sydney, Australia. Gardner ended arguably the greatest winning streak in modern sports, an estimated 300 consecutive wins, only 2 of which had even ever gone into overtime, and no draws, include a record-breaking 12 world championships. Karelin hadn't lost a match in any form of competition since he was 18 years old and was competing against a world champion in an open tournament in Russia. Karelin, who looked far older than his age of 33 in the competition, which beforehand he had said would be his last before retiring, won his first match over Sergei Marku of Bulgaria by a 3-0 score in his second round match via pin in 1:48 over Mihai Dikbardos, which aired late Monday night on NBC. On September 27, Karelin beat Soldaje 4-0 to go into the gold medal match. Mark, who took the bronze at the 1996 Olympics behind Karelin and American Matt Ghaffari. It was believed that Karelin, who did one pro wrestling match last year for rings against Akira Maeda, after the Olympics would be able to command more money for a single match in Japan than anyone in history, including Rickson Gracie, had he won another gold medal. Karelin had said he was not interested in doing any matches in Japan after the Olympics, after first having said after his debut match that he would consider it but not until after Sydney. Gardner, through the notoriety of beating Karelin, will no doubt get numerous opportunities thrown his way in both the pro wrestling and shoot fighting world. With the exception of Jeff Blatnick in 1984, and that has an asterisk next to it because so many of the top wrestling nations boycotted those games and Blatnick went against a weaker field, no American had ever won a gold medal in the super heavyweight division in Greco-Roman wrestling since the inception of the Olympics in 1896. With the exception of Blatnick's gold in 1984 and Matt Ghaffari's silver in 1996, no other American super heavyweight wrestler had ever even medaled. If Karelin had captured the gold, he would have become only the fourth athlete in sports history to win 4 gold medals in the same event, joining Paul Elvstrom, a sailor from Denmark, Al Order, American discus star in the 60s, and Carl Lewis, long jump. One would have suspected, between the return of Steve Austin in the first major singles match with Triple H versus Kurt Angle, the buy rate for the WWF's Unforgiven pay-per-view would be well above normal WWF pay-per-view levels. But it was presented and came off, with the exception of Austin's return, as almost a throwaway show. It had its good matches, but none great. It had its bad matches, but none that terrible. It was hurt by a lack of crowd heat throughout, although those there live said it wasn't nearly as bad live as it came across on television. The reaction to the show was as close to average as it can get, and that's probably a fair description. The show looked enticing on paper, but had an imaginative booking that seemed designed more to placate everyone than build anyone. In a sense it came off as WCW of a few years ago, where everyone has their spot, and for better or worse, that remains their spot. The big negative, which hasn't shown up yet, is that over the long run that breeds an environment where people aren't hungry, which is part of what killed WCW when they were loaded with talent. But WWF often put on better shows with lesser talent because the talent was more motivated, feeling their work wasn't going unnoticed. The show on September 24th at the First Union Center in Philadelphia legitimately sold out in 2 hours when tickets were put on sale months ago, with 18,092 in the building, which was 16,862 paying $822,400 and another $172,200 in merchandise. All the way up and down the show, it seemed the booking was designed to keep the status quo. From the opener, where the Dudleys did the job and got their heat back with a post-match attack, it seemed we had a steady diet of that. X-Pac versus Jericho, who did probably the best job of anyone in the ring, had the same story. Taz versus Lawler had outside interference of Raven with feature the overdone "he doesn't even work here" line transposed slightly to "he's not even on our roster." Philadelphia was a good place to introduce Raven, because most of the fans knew him, but it was shocking how little reaction Taz and Lawler got, and there seemed to be a lot of confusion how to react. The fans wanted to cheer Taz, but didn't want to boo Lawler. Did Rikishi attacking China make him a heel or not? And talk about a finish that made zero sense. Guerrero Rikishi was totally weird. I guess working the match because of the size discrepancy may have been hard, so they booked a match where they never even tried. It was like a giant stall with a weak finish. Triple H Angle was a very good psychological match and would have been the best match on the card if it hadn't come in with so much hype and come out with so little crowd reaction and such a weak finish. In some ways, it was actually a flop given the lack of heat after 9 months of building, and perhaps the lack of heat is because in this entire feud and in Angle's entire run, because the whole thing got off to a bad start when Angle's very distinctive music played and he came out to almost no reaction either way. For all his comedic talents and athletic ability, he's never been portrayed as a threat one-on-one to any top star. The way he's been booked is great for an undercard chicken shit heel, but not for a guy put in a position to have impact on top or, to use a tired phrase but that is applicable in a main event position, to draw money. Granted, I expect a huge buy rate anyway. Very early projections were in the 1.5 range, which I'd attribute once again to Austin more than anything else since it would probably beat out SummerSlam, and the last time Austin appeared it was the second biggest buy rate to Mania of the year even though it was a non-major show, so that sort of contradicts that point. In comparing this to Goldberg-Steiner, which had tons more heat a week earlier, you're still talking about a match where the heat was disappointing doing, say, 600,000 or more buys, against one with Superheat doing, say, 80,000 buys, so all this talk about crowd reaction in the big picture is probably missing the real point of what wrestling is. Still, Angle was squashed like a bug all through the Undertaker angle, and even though he injured Triple H with a sledgehammer on SmackDown and forced himself on Stephanie to build to this match, clearly people never took him seriously as a threat to beat Triple H man on man for all his talent. Even if it wasn't as dead live as it appeared on television, nobody could argue that after 9 months of hype, even if the crowd reaction was average, that couldn't be anything but a huge disappointment. There is also a noticeable loss in the kids' audience and a recent drop in ratings even before the TNN move, which may be attributed to this soap opera being the focal point of the show. At schools, WWF, which was huge the past 2 years with Austin and then Rock, is now the fad from last year. It isn't like the WWF is in any trouble because revenues and profits are huge and that isn't likely to change, and the only negative sign is a disappointing performance from the Yaks line, and the young kid audience is a fad audience anyway, and it may be unfair to blame anything other than pro wrestling was the hot thing and now Scooters or some other TV show is. Still, Angle badly needed to go over with a finish where Stephanie screwed up trying to help Triple H to keep the mystery going as to whether she really screwed up. Instead, Angle is becoming a higher card version of Benoit under Kevin Sullivan. Edge and Christian vs. Hardys was a good match. Again, the storyline where one brother, who was bloodied, being left with two heels while the other brother and the girl who is just a friend are outside cheering him on should have been great drama. Perhaps because fans seeing this pairing are expecting a high-flying spectacle as opposed to old-fashioned psychology, the match didn't get the heat live, or maybe it's just that they were a crowd that has seen so much over the years, and have that now show me something I haven't seen mentality which kills trying to get psychology over. The main event was a good match. It was nowhere near the level of most WWF pay-per-view main events, but Benoit came out strong, and the idea of putting him over first and then having him do the job probably kept his stock from falling, but it was the final example of the booking philosophy of an entire show. Far more than Rock, the biggest crowd reaction was for the return of Austin, with Jim Ross trying to sell it for all, and perhaps more, than it was worth. But while Austin tore the roof off the place in delivering 3 stunners to Shane McMahon, even that segment left you feeling ripped off. The pre-match hype was that they would reveal who the driver of the car was. In many ways this was similar to the WCW Bash pay-per-view when they promised the biggest news story in the history of wrestling that would change the landscape of the entire profession, and delivered a Goldberg turn that was so ill-advised they rescinded it within a few weeks. Granted, the promise wasn't as big, and one could argue it was made by a heel and heels lie, but they were selling $30 orders partially based on promising a conclusion. Yes, it was far too early for the conclusion. But this type of non-delivery for something hyped to get you to buy a show is better for a free television show to draw ratings than something put on a $30 show. For all the criticism, I can't call it a bad show, but it was also not nearly as good as the WCW show of the previous week. But the key matches were all good. It just came off more like watching an average Raw but with a little longer matches. 1. RTC, Mike Manna and Charles Wright and Sean Morley and Barry Buchanan beat the Acolytes, Ron Simmons and John Layfield, and Dudley's Dan Hughes and Mark LaMonica in 6:04. Goodfather looked pretty bad early. The match got better when Venus was in. Finish saw Steven Richards hit his Steven kick, and they sure need to give that move a better name, on Bubba. Actually he missed it, but since it was the finish, that was it, and Venus covered Bubba for the pin. Richards, with his bad knee, never actually tagged in and his only real involvement was delivering the kick for the finish. The teams brawled after the match, with all the heels bailing, leaving Richards alone. Bradshaw probably gave Richards low back problems for life with a stiff kick. Bubba then power-bombed him through a table. 3/4 stars. 2. Taz Peter Cernurka beat Jerry Lawler in a strap match in 5:05. It was billed as you had to drag your opponent around and touch all 4 corners. Amazing lack of heat. Both guys exchanged whipping each other with the straps. It was pretty bad early as Taz doesn't sell well at all. Lawler delivered 3 pile drivers in a row. Taz popped up on the first 2, then popped up on the third and collapsed. Pile drivers are unofficially banned, but I guess the mentality is if you don't sell them, they must not be dangerous. After a ref bump, Raven came out and hit Lawler with a DDT and Taz choked Lawler out for the win. Raven got a good pop, but not a great pop. 1/4 star. Austin showed up and threw Kevin Kelly into a garage door. Michael Cole came out to replace the injured Lawler for a few matches. 3. Steve Blackman retained his title in a 10 minutes hardcore match over Crash, Michael Lockwood, Al Snow, Alan Sarvin, Test, Andrew Martin, Perry Saturn, Perry Sotolo, and Shoichi Funaki. This was similar in format to the WrestleMania match, but better since it wasn't played as much for laughs. Saturn worked really hard. He did another tope into a garbage can shot early in the match. The one comedy spot was when Saturn got the head and hit Trish Stratus with it, then Test got the head and hit Terry with it, to give Ross a chance to yell about Stratus, and Terry just got head. Crash nearly hurt himself doing a totally messed up Hurricane Rana, but shook it off and appeared to be fine. Saturn did a moonsault off the top to the floor. This was all in the first 4 minutes, which were much better than most hardcore matches. The last 6 minutes turned into one of those redundant hardcore matches where you've already seen the garbage can lid shots for 4 minutes and you're still seeing them. Crash pinned Blackman at 3:54 to win the title for the zillionth time. Crash tried to run away, but Saturn hit him with a garbage can lid and got the title via pin in 4:06. It slowed at this point, except a stretch where Saturn and Blackman were dueling with sticks and Blackman was killing everyone. Blackman pinned Saturn in 9:01 after a cane shot to the head. The last minute of the match saw everyone kicking the hell out of Blackman, ending with Blackman not getting pinned. A very strange finish since it basically just ended without even near falls. Among the highlights were Snow signing autographs for fans while brawling in the crowd, and Test selling when Snow hit him with an empty pizza box. 1 3/4 stars. Austin bumped into Angle backstage and kicked his ass. Angle was pretty funny about it in interviews throughout the rest of the show. 4. Chris Jericho, Chris Irvine, pinned X-Pac, Sean Waltman, in 9:03. Fast-paced, really good match. X-Pac used a flip plancha early. He whipped Jericho into timekeeper Mark Eaton. X-Pac had his working shoes on more than any time in months. Ross was pushing the idea of X-Pac as a singles wrestler. It was obvious who was going over since X-Pac took the first 6 minutes, including doing the Bronco Buster. Jericho made a comeback with a power bomb and even did a Bronco Buster. Jericho kicked out of the X Factor. Jericho used a power bomb into the walls of Jericho, but X-Pac made the ropes. X-Pac got a near fall with a sweet spin kick. Jericho did a facebuster, followed by a lionsault, but X-Pac got his knees up. X-Pac came off the top again, but Jericho caught him and turned him over for the Lion Tamer for the tap. After the match, X-Pac destroyed Jericho with nunchucks. 3.5 stars. Austin and Rock had a stare down, but then shook hands and acted as if they were longtime best friends. Have I missed something? Just Joe came in to introduce himself to Austin. Austin beat him up. 5. Matt and Jeff Hardy won the WWF Tag Titles in a cage match over Christian, Jay Resso and Edge, Adam Copeland in 13:33. The rules were that the first team to get both wrestlers out of the cage wins. It was said that a wrestler out of the cage wasn't allowed back in. Jeff climbed the cage, then fell down to the floor just 2 minutes in. This left Matt against both guys. He was superplexed off the cage by Edge and Christian as he tried to escape. They kept calling it a 15-foot cage. It looked to be 10. Jeff climbed up from the outside to help, but took another bump to the floor. Even though Matt Justin was being beaten on in a cage 2-on-1, it didn't have the crowd heat you'd expect from a pretty boy babyface. Vince McMahon at first nixed the idea of doing a blade job in the match. It was only the second time Matt had ever bladed. First time was in a 1994 indie match. But all four talked McMahon into it. This is the classic old-time stuff to get young girls to scream, and it just doesn't happen nowadays, even though the Hardys definitely have the young girl fans. Jeff attacked ref Jimmy Corderas and grabbed the key. He unlocked it. Christian went out of the cage and laid out Jeff. Edge ended up getting the key and putting it down his pants. Edge and Christian missed the sandwich chair, which they are calling the concerto. Fans started getting into it when Jeff pulled out a ladder from under the ring. Christian fell off the cage, leaving it Edge versus Matt. Edge did a bulldog off the top. Jeff was trying to climb back in. Jeff climbed to the top of the cage and did a corkscrew moonsault, for the most part missing both Matt and Edge, which they called the Whisper in the Wind, because Jeff used to wrestle under a mask as Will-o'-the-Wisp, and that was his finishing move in those days. Lita came out and gave Christian a low blow and a Hurricane Rana outside the ring off the apron, and both took hard falls to the floor. Lita was okay, mainly selling an arm injury. The match ended with both Hardys and Edge on the top of the cage, and they gave him the concerto, causing Edge to take a bump into the ring. Edge was said to want to take that move as the finish based on the build-up, and both Hardys climbed to the floor simultaneously. McMahon wanted both climbing out together for the win. 3.5 stars. Austin found Stephanie. Stephanie gave Austin back his hat. He didn't beat her up. Triple H and Mick Foley had the weirdest interplay. First, he joked with Foley about the wars the two had in the past. The two laughed about the angle on Raw where they showed Angle crying, and said how they used to be enemies but now were almost friends. Then he said he didn't want Foley to be a biased ref because he knew that Foley hated him. I was getting really confused at this point. 6. Eddie Guerrero beat Rikishi Solo Fafatu via DQ in 6:03 to keep the IC title. Guerrero wanted to leave, but China wouldn't let him and threw him back in the ring. Rikishi set up the stinky face, but China saved Guerrero. China then argued with Rikishi, distracting him so Guerrero could do a plancha outside the ring. Guerrero missed a frog splash. Rikishi squashed him with his huge ass. Rikishi then badly missed a diamond cutter but did deliver a Samoan drop and a bonsai. China stopped ref Jack Doan from counting. All this had no heat. Rikishi threw China into the ring, shoved her down and gave her a Steven kick. Let's see. China stopped the ref from counting a sure pin. But Rikishi gets DQ'd for kicking a participant who had no business in the ring in the first place. Rikishi then gave China a bonsai. Nobody could figure out if this was a Rikishi turn or not. 1/4 star. 7. Triple H pinned Kurt Angle in 17:26 of a no DQ match with Mick Foley as ref. Triple H had ribs taped up due to the sledgehammer attack on SmackDown. At least that made sense. Angle attacked the ribs for the first few minutes. The only pop in the early minutes, including for Angle kicking out of a near fall, was chance for Foley when he shoved down Angle. Triple H took the old Harley race bump over the top. Triple H suplexed Angle on the floor. Triple H delivered a hard chair to the back. Angle blocked a pedigree on the American announcer's table, then delivered a belly-to-belly suplex on Triple H, who took the bump through the Spanish table, which was the highlight of the match. Triple H sold the move great. Stephanie gave Triple H something at this point, which was so Triple H appeared to be bleeding from the mouth and eye to set up the bloody kiss for later. In the ring, Angle kept delivering shoulders to the ribs. Angle missed a shoulder block. Triple H came back fighting with one arm. Angle got a near fall with a belly-to-belly superplex. Scary quiet considering who it was and how good it was. Angle missed a moonsault. Triple H did a one-armed pedigree, still selling his left arm. Stephanie was called in by Triple H to make a choice, and she kicked Angle low. Triple H then delivered a pedigree for the pin. Stephanie acted like she felt guilty about what she did and Triple H forced a kiss on her while he was all bloody and she acted repulsed. 3.25 stars. Shane McMahon came out saying he had video proof over who ran Austin over. He showed a video of Blackman running over Ken Shamrock from an angle in ancient history. Fans booed this. Blackman came out and Austin gave him a stunner. Then, to show he didn't believe it was Blackman, he gave McMahon a stunner. Then he gave him a second one. Then he left, and seemed so happy because the place was going nuts. He came back for an encore and gave him a third one. Ross was trying to sell it like it was the single biggest pop in the history of pro wrestling. 8. Brock, Dwayne Johnson, retained the WWF title in a four-way over Chris Benoit, Undertaker, Mark Calloway and Kane Glenn Jacobs in 15-18. Undertaker looked like a red-headed Harris twin in his new tank top with all the tattoos. Rock's reaction paled compared to Austin, but blew away everyone else on the show. Not much heat early. Match was bad early, since Undertaker seemed to be the focal point. There was an early ref bump. Rock hit a DDT on Kane and had him covered. Undertaker hit Rock with a chair and Benoit hit Undertaker with a chair on ref Earl Hebner counted 3, even though Undertaker's legs were way under the ropes in 7:09. Benoit was leaving with the belt, which, since it was the same thing they did 2 shows back, looks to be a pattern, since the same thing happened again. Foley came out and ordered the match restarted. Let's see. Almost every match on the show has a bad finish, usually with outside interference, and Benoit's very last win on a pay-per-view was using the ropes, but this is the only match Foley is watching. The second half of the match was really good, largely due to Benoit. He did a rolling German suplex for a near fall and a diving headbutt for a near fall. Rock got the crossface on Benoit in the middle but Undertaker saved. Kane choke slammed Undertaker but Benoit saved. Rock hit Kane with a spinebuster but Benoit blocked him from doing the people's elbow. Undertaker did the last ride on Rock but Kane saved. Benoit hit Undertaker and Kane with chairs and put Rock in the crossface in the middle of the ring. He had the hold on for so long people were starting to believe it when finally Undertaker made the save. Undertaker choke slammed Benoit but Kane saved. Rock hit the rock bottom on Benoit and Undertaker went to save, but Kane stopped Undertaker, which made no sense, and Benoit was pinned. Katsuhiko Nagata, the 26-year-old younger brother of New Japan's Yuji Nagata, captured the silver medal in Greco-Roman wrestling at 152 pounds on September 27 at the Olympics in Sydney, Australia. Nagata, who works as a Tokyo police officer, defeated Alexei Glotchkov of Russia by a 3-1 score in his semi-final match before losing the gold medal match either by an 11-0 or an 11-9 score. The match literally ended at deadline time and we had conflicting reports. To Filiberto Azcui of Cuba, who he actually trained with before the Olympics, Nagata's win was the lead news story in Japan on Wednesday afternoon, but it was expected to be knocked out of the lead due to the upset of Karelin. On September 25, Nagata won his first round match over Ruslan Baiktaev of UZB by a 3-1 score but lost to Heath Sims of the United States by a 3-1 score in the second round. He advanced out of his bracket and got an injury bye to advance into medal contention. In May, Nagata had won the gold medal in the Asian Championships. His older brother, who is one of New Japan's top stars, was a former national champion in Greco-Roman wrestling and a 1992 Olympic hopeful. What on paper seemed like a lackluster show turned out to be a pretty successful one as far as match quality for UFC on September 22, the New Orleans Lakefront Arena. World Extreme Fighting heavyweight champion Dan Severn, 42, who got a huge pop with the nostalgia factor working in his favor as a pioneer of the sport, unfortunately fell victim to the reality of age and losing the main event to Pedro Hitzo in just 1:32 after a kick to the side of the knee which saw Severn's leg buckle and him go down wincing heavily in pain. The nostalgia thing had already paid off in the previous match with Maurice Smith, who turns 39 in December, winning a hard-fought and exciting majority decision, one judge of the three ruling the fight a draw against a younger, larger and more powerful Extreme Challenge heavyweight champion Bobby Hoffman. Smith got the nod through being more ring-wise and in better condition. In the fight, Hoffman clearly won the first round and Smith even more resoundingly won the third round, but even though Smith's margin would have been greater and if there were no point system for rounds I would have judged the fight for Smith. On the basis of the 3 rounds it could have easily been a draw. The second round was pretty tight. On first viewing, I listed it as even, but after watching a replay, feel Smith deserved the round. Even though Hoffman was more tired than Smith in the second round, Hoffman scored 2 takedowns. Smith zapped even more of his energy controlling him with a front face lock and was the aggressor when they were on their feet with a lot of body blows. Smith clearly did more damage in the round. It was also announced at the show, in a deal closed literally hours earlier, that the next show on November 17th from the Trump Taj Mahal in Atlantic City, New Jersey would be headlined by Kevin Randleman vs. Randy Couture for the UFC heavyweight title. Couture, who won the title on December 21, 1997 from Smith in a close decision in Yokohama, Japan, then was stripped of the title after his Raw management team and Semaphore Entertainment Group couldn't agree to terms to bring him back. It's an interesting matchup of world-class wrestlers, neither of whom are afraid to trade punches standing. Couture is more ring-wise and slightly bigger but probably not stronger, has more international experience, but Randleman is just an athletic phenom. Yuki Kondo, who had a tough win over Alexander Dantas of Brazil, who recently won the World Championship in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the best fight of the show, seemed groomed for a middleweight title challenge in what logically should be the main event of the UFC's December pay-per-view show in Japan, challenging Tito Ortiz in the match that originally was scheduled to headline this show. The UFC Japan promotion, which is affiliated with UFC but is a separate company except that their shows up to this point have aired in the US as UFC PPVs and the American side's title holders are recognized and the Americans have input into the booking, has announced a show on November 23 at Tokyo Sumo Hall. Reports of Shinya Hashimoto doing the show are premature. The UFCJ people may have contacted New Japan to get Hashimoto's services, but Hashimoto has no interest in doing a real fight as it's just stupid for him to be involved because his shooter reputation as a pro wrestler would be put in jeopardy for no reason. UFCJ has also expressed interest in Tokumitsu Ishizawa, which also isn't a good idea for New Japan. UFC Japan also has a date scheduled for December 16th at Differ Ariake. Ortiz, whose match scheduled with Kondo was cancelled when his management pulled him from the show after a contract dispute when Ortiz management tried to change terms a few weeks out, has been signed to defend his title on the December 16th show and his new management team has reached a long-term agreement with Semaphore Entertainment Group, which indicates the card from the smaller building will be taped for American pay-per-view. Kondo came into the fight with a bad rib from a training injury 10 days earlier, which was serious enough that there was legitimate consideration given to him backing out of the show. The win by Hitzo in a sense puts him back in the heavyweight title picture against the Randleman-Couture winner. The problem is the Randleman-Hitzo program has been a terrible jinx thus far. The first time they were scheduled, Randleman was injured backstage after the show started and the match never got in the ring, leaving UFC with a black eye and a dispute with DirecTV, which not only pulled all replays of the show but ordered them to offer refunds because the advertised main event didn't take place. While there is merit to their stance in regard to, through nobody's fault in that case, not presenting the advertised main event, by making this ruling, DirecTV adopted a double standard that pro wrestling promoters haven't been held to. Once UFC got the fight into the ring months later, they were left with an even blacker eye as the two had the most boring main event match in the history of the promotion. An interesting factor, which went completely unmentioned on the show, was that the heavyweight champions for two of UFC's biggest domestic rivals lost on the show. Severn was heavyweight champion for World Extreme Fighting, and basically got smoked. Hoffman was the heavyweight champion for Extreme Challenge. While they gave credentials for both men, Severn's being a mile long, and for Hoffman they mentioned his win-loss record, and that he once played for the Cleveland Browns, they never mentioned his EC belt. Neither was allowed to wear their respective title belts into the show either. You can argue both sides of the issue, as UFC doesn't want to acknowledge there are other promotions around. When Mark Coleman, the heavyweight champion for Pride, was interviewed, they mentioned he had been fighting overseas and brought up the idea of him coming back to UFC, but Pride and his winning the biggest tournament in the history of MMA were never mentioned, which left everyone involved looking foolish, as if they're hiding something. At the same time, when the buys, due to lack of visibility and publicity, are down to only the hardcore base, taking the 1980s WWF mindset, which even the WWF no longer takes, as they've acknowledged ECW and WCW numerous times when it fits into the storyline, although never allow the perception of the other two companies to be equal to even WWF prelim level, as noted by Taz jobbing to everyone everywhere during that week he had the ECW title, totally insults the audience that is buying the show, particularly in the Coleman interview, where it was actually painful to watch the issue avoided, as opposed to Severn and Hoffman, where it simply wasn't brought up and nobody considers Severn or Hoffman a real world champion anyway. Kazuyuki Fujita was also at the show but never acknowledged on the broadcast. The atmosphere live on TV looked poor, as the arena was darkened since there were less than 1,000 fans in the arena, which made it come across live like an indie pro wrestling show, without even t-shirts being sold at the building. With Jeff Blatnick in Australia for the Olympics, Frank Shamrock did the color during the show. Shamrock's voice was hoarse, and due to poor production of the show, the crowd noise was turned up to where it was often hard to hear play-by-play man Mike Goldberg, bled a color man with a weaker voice. They did a gimmick of micing Shamrock up while in Smith's corner, which was pretty good, and for whatever reason, Shamrock's voice was loud as he was screaming at Smith throughout the fight. Perhaps the most controversial thing on the show was when Booker John Peretti, after Smith's win, was asked about if Severn, at his age, would also show people something. "I don't think he's ever shown us much," said Peretti to a shocked Goldberg. "Not a submission hold in his entire body. A terrific takedown and a slapping kind of side control. From a technical standpoint in breaking Severn down, and it should be noted he was long past his physical prime, 36, when he started in this sport. He started out as a very strong wrestler, winning his last national championship in 1994. With very rudimentary submission skills to finish. He was never a good striker standing, although has delivered some brutal knees on the ground, and today is no longer the wrestler or fighter he was 6 years ago, let alone 16 years ago when he was among the best in the world. However, for the most part, Severn is a winner, which matters in competition, often more than breaking down of various skills, although that clearly wasn't enough to carry him at 42 against a younger man with the skills of Hiso. But for a guy who doesn't have a submission hold in his body, and this isn't the first time that knock has been thrown at him, and he certainly isn't a smooth or fancy submission expert, he has probably a few dozen submission wins in his career, perhaps as many in Vale Tudo competition as any active fighter, including a recent choke submission win over a supposed submission expert, Marcus Conan Silveira, to win the WEF title. A. Brad Gum drew CJ Fernandez in the first dark match after 2 5-minute rounds, 10 minutes. B. In what was said to have been a good match, Jeff Monson won a unanimous decision over Tim Lajic after 2 rounds, 10 minutes. Monson, the 1999 World Submission Fighting Champion in the Abu Dhabi tournament, was giving away a lot of size, but still managed to take Lajic down and do damage from the top to win the first round. Lajic got a takedown in the second round, but Monson reversed it and finished the fight strong. 1. Ian Freeman, 229, England, won a unanimous decision after 3 rounds, 15 minutes, over Ted Williams, 258 US, in a competitive but kind of boring match. Williams got a takedown right away in the first round and threw some knees and elbows while in an advantageous position the entire round. In the second round, Williams took him down once, but was starting to tire. After Freeman escaped, Williams wasn't able to take him down, allowing Freeman to get good positioning on the ground and connect with punches and knees to win the round. Williams was really tired in the third round and couldn't take him down, and took more punishment with knees and punches from the top on the ground, but never came close to finishing. 2. Yuki Kondo, 191, Japan, defeated Alexander Dantas, 199, Brazil, in 12:29 via ref stoppage. This was the fight of the show. Dantas lived up to his reputation by getting good ground positioning in a very competitive match. Dantas got a takedown and even amount. Kondo ate some punches, but kept his cool and managed a reversal in the guard right when it appeared he might get choked. Kondo started to throw some punches and a good knee. First round was even. Second round saw Dantas get another takedown and another mount. Once again Kondo reversed. Dantas got a second takedown late in the round. Third round saw Kondo make Dantas' legs buckle with a powerful right which changed the entire complexion of the fight. Kondo took over from here, pounding on him, scoring another strong right and a knee before the match was stopped. Kondo, when Dantas was in trouble, threw some flashy kicks and the audience really got into him. 3. Fabiano Iha, 169, Brazil, upset Laverne Clark, 169, Iowa, in 113. Clark, who beat Iha in less than 2 minutes previously on a blood stoppage, came out throwing, but Iha caught his arm. Clark tried to break the armbar by lifting Iha up and giving him a short powerbomb, but Iha held on and Clark had to tap. 4. Jeremy Horn, 199, Iowa, defeated Eugene Jackson, 199, Palo Alto, California, in 4:33 with an armbar. Horn took Jackson down and dominated the positioning, making a quick move into getting the armbar. Horn looked very impressive here against a fighter who had scored some impressive UFC wins in the past. 5. Maurice Smith, 226, Seattle, defeated Bobby Hoffman, 260, Iowa, via majority decision after 3 rounds, 15 minutes. Hoffman is the heavyweight champion of Extreme Challenge and has scored some big knockout wins over top wrestlers in rings this year. Considering Smith's age, and the fact he hasn't looked good in a long time, this had to be considered an upset. Smith won this match more on guile than on physical gifts. He basically figured on losing the first round, and hoping for Hoffman to gas out in his excitement of attempting to finish. The strategy worked perfectly, because Hoffman was gassed in the second round, with his mouthpiece even coming out once, and totally spent in the third, which made for a dramatic win. Hoffman took Smith down, got the mount and easily took the first round. Hoffman took Smith down in the second round. Smith got away and scored some before being taken down, and tired Hoffman out more with a near guillotine. Smith was also looking tired by this point, but he had more left than Hoffman. I thought the second round was pretty even, but 2 of the 3 judges gave it to Smith, which made the difference. Hoffman was totally spent in the third round and Smith worked his body. Hoffman held onto Smith in a clinch, keeping him from getting the distance necessary to really do much more than close-range body punching and a few uppercuts. Still, Hoffman's nose and mouth were bleeding by the end of the round, which was easily Smith's, which gave him the decision. There was a slight altercation after the match. An interesting note is that Frank Shamrock, who was the color commentator for the show, his actual commentary was good, but because his voice was shot, you could barely hear him over the crowd most of the show, except this match, was wired and did some commentary while being in Smith's corner, which added a perspective. 6. Pedro Hitso, 237, Brazil, defeated Dan Severn, 259, Michigan, in 132. Severn got a big pop coming out as he was pushed as an aging pioneer of the sport and one of the people who built the sport in the US. He commanded a lot of respect, but once the match started, he was simply too slow and greatly showed his age in his movement, as the world of fighting is very cruel to older legends, and this was a perfect example of that statement. He went for a takedown, and didn't even come close and ended up stumbling to the ground. He seemed happy to be on his back as opposed to standing, but Hitso would have none of it. Hitso threw one strong leg kick, which caused Severn to momentarily go down. A second kick, to the side of the knee, saw Severn collapse in pain and the match was stopped. Rings announced the bracketing for the A block in its annual King of Kings tournament, which starts on October 9th at Tokyo Yoyogi Gym, which has the unenviable task of going head-to-head literally 2 train station stops away from the Kawada vs. Sasaki Tokyo Dome show the same day. The matches announced are Mikhail Borisov, Russian Sambo fighter, versus Roberto Traven, a well-known 6'6" Brazilian jiu-jitsu specialist, Dave Mena, a solid 190-pounder from the Pat Militic camp, versus Wataru Sakata, Seren Balakinsky, A Russian Sambo fighter coming in with a great reputation, versus Valentin Overeem, rings regular from Holland, Bijaj Teriel, a 6'7", 330-pound cross between Anton Geesink and Jim Duggan, who was a former world champion in rings when it was a work promotion, who looked terrible when he had to shoot last year, versus Renato Babalu, who went to the finals this year losing to Dan Henderson in a very close and controversial decision. Randy Couture, former UFC champion and former US Greco-Roman national champion, versus Jeremy Horn, coming off a very impressive win at UFC. Ryushi Yanagisawa, formerly with Pancrase and K1, versus Borislav Zhelyazkov, former Bulgarian national team wrestler. Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighter who was quite frankly robbed in the semifinals this year against Henderson, versus Labazanov, armed, Russia. And Brad Kohler, pro wrestler from Minnesota who has done some UFC and several rings events over the past year, versus Kiyoshi Tamura, ring's biggest draw. In handicapping the field, and it's awfully hard to predict shoots, we don't know about Borisov other than he's 38 years old, weighs 198, and was a Russian national champion in Sambo in 1991, which means Travan's world titles in jiu-jitsu, which translates better historically, were more recent, and he's a much bigger man, with more experience and a wider variety of rules, not to mention a lot younger, which on paper makes him a favorite. Mena versus Sakata should be a good match with Mena a favorite. Again, we don't know Balakinski under these rules. Overeem can be beat, but he's more experienced within these rules, and pure Sambo, with nothing else, hasn't proved to be a winning formula in some time under mixed rules. Mikhail Tyomirov, the chairman of FIAS, Federation International Amateur Sambo, said Balakinski, 27, is the best Sambo wrestler in the world today. Balakinski's credentials include winning the Russian championship the past 3 years, 1998 world champion at 198 pounds and World Cup champion, and 1999 world champion at 220 pounds. Babalu should destroy Teriel. Couture is a better wrestler than Horn and probably as good a striker as well, but Couture has fallen for submission moves against Enson Inoue and a very weird loss to Ilyakine Mikhail in rings, and Horn has far more experience at this game, particularly against top-flight competition, and it is his game, whereas it's Couture's second sport. Zhelyazkov knows nothing but wrestling, but he's very good at it, so his match could go either way. Nogueira is a good fighter and will be favored in his match. Tamura is a far better fighter than Kohler, but he's going to be giving away 50 pounds, tons of strength and better wrestling ability. Kohler's freaky strength could put a hurting on Tamura like he did to Yamamoto last year, as Tamura has never in a shoot ever had to deal with anyone with that level of power. But if he doesn't get Tamura early, he could lose on conditioning. Even on stand-up, while Tamura is better schooled and far more versatile, Kohler does have a great punch, which may be hard to land on someone as skilled standing as Tamura, but Tamura's kicks at 190 aren't going to do the damage to a 240-pounder that they do to someone in his same weight class. I'm very surprised by this booking because it's a very dangerous match for the biggest drawing card right off the bat, and it's a no-win for him. Kohler has lost a few times in Japan, so he's not considered a threat or a star. Tamura has nothing to gain by the win, as based on their records, Kohler should be an easy tune-up. But Kohler has got so much size and power on Tamura that he's still dangerous to risk Tamura within the first round of a tournament. Since they are doing first and second round matches, Tamura would likely have to face Nogueira, who is also 50 pounds heavier, and skilled enough that he'd have to also be a favorite over Tamura if they had a second round match. It is believed that Dan Henderson, who won the $223,000 first prize in the tournament that ended in February, will not be back to defend his title because he has signed with Pride, and they are setting him up for a match next year with Kazushi Sakuraba. In other Olympic news, Japan captured a gold medal in judo at 220 with Kosei Inoue, and a silver in the unlimited weight division with Shinichi Shinohara, who lost to David Douillet of France for the gold. Douillet had also won gold in 1996 and bronze, behind only future pro wrestlers David Kakalishvili and Naoya Ogawa, in 1992. The major names to look out for in pro wrestling besides potentially Gardner, Karelin and Nagata include Kerry McCoy and Hector Milian in freestyle and Greco-Roman wrestling. Milian won his first 2 matches over Helger Halleck of Estonia and Haley Zhao of China, lost his third to Dmitry Debelka of Belarus, but came back to win his 4th over Georgy Soldaje of Ukraine. Since this was going down at press time and a lot of the info is unclear, I believe he ended up with a bronze medal, but he may have ended up in 5th place. Matt Lindland, who has a 3-0 record in MMA and was the subject of all the controversy over him making the team at 167 in Greco-Roman, ended up winning a silver medal, losing the gold medal match 3-0 to Murat Kardinov of Russia. SmackDown on September 21st did a 4.74 rating going against the Olympics. Thunder on September 20th held up pretty well against the Olympics with a 2.50 rating at 3.9 share. The built until 10 p.m. and then slowly dropped the rest of the way as first hour was 2.55 and second hour was 2.47. Weekend ratings for the final weekend on USA saw Livewire at 1.2, Superstars at 1.5 and Heat drew a 2.59 rating. ECW on September 22nd drew an 0.8 rating for what at the time was pushed as the final show. The Galavision Lucha Libre block on September 19th drew a 1.7 Hispanic rating. Mexico. The September 29th pay-per-view show has been delayed several weeks because the Olympics is preempting wrestling in Mexico, not giving the company adequate time to promote it. This Friday's show will still be the 67th anniversary show, but it won't be on pay-per-view. The planned CN Cars vs. Pierroth Jr. hair vs. hair match will be moved until the pay-per-view. Pierroth Jr. is said to be hurting big time due to injuries, but he's the focal point of the EMLL group doing the Puerto Rican Hill Alliance, so he's not taking any time off. Instead, the anniversary show will be headlined by CN's younger brother, Universo 2000, defending the CMLL heavyweight title against Pierroth Jr. and a singles match for the Leyenda de Plata trophy with Negro Casas vs. Dr. Wagner Jr., as the two went to a double pin draw on September 22nd in a match where the idea was the winner would face El Hijo del Santo, who holds the trophy named after his father, for the trophy on September 29th. Santo, who had been on the outs with the company, was at the September 22nd show that honored his father, so he may face the winner on October 6th. AAA's big summer show, Verano de Escándalo or Summer Scandal, takes place September 29th in Madero with all matches taking place in a six-sided ring. Main event has Hector Garza and Latin Lover, with Humberto Garza Sr., Hector's father, a big-time star in the 60s, in their corner against Pero Aguayo Jr. and Heavy Metal, who will have Heavy's father, Pepe Casas, in their corner. Also, actor Huicho Dominguez is back in Abismo Negro's corner against Cibernetico. La Parca Jr. and El Alebrije and Sangre Chicana, and a mystery partner face Cobarde and Texano and Pirata Morgan and Espectro Jr. In the Leyenda de Plata, Legend of the Silver Mask Tournament Championship, on September 22nd, Casas was left with 5 Rudos, Rey Bucanero, Wagner, Black Warrior, Fuerza Guerrera and Zumbido, and eliminated all of them until he was left with Wagner, and the two battled to a double pin. After the disastrous big show a few weeks ago, Iguas is already in trouble and it is thought they may fold up unless they can reach a deal with EMLL to use the Arena Mexico talent. The wrestler using the name Super Sasuke under a mask is almost surely Japanese wrestler Mitsunobu Kikuzawa, who is touring with Nozawa and Sanshiro Takagi. All Japan. All Japan announced on September 25th that Genichiro Tenryu had signed a full-time contract with the company. Tenryu, 50, wrestled with All Japan from debuting after being a big star in sumo, to much fanfare in 1976 through 1990, when he quit while being one of the hottest wrestlers in the business to join Super World Sports, a huge money production that was poorly received by the fans. He's managed to keep his career alive through his name value from his All Japan glory days, and parlayed it into drawing some huge houses for dream matches against New Japan wrestlers, doing an outsider gimmick as well as a program with Nobuhiko Takada. However, he hasn't worked a full-time schedule in years, because of his name and experience, and he's a tough guy as far as willing to take punishment at his age. He has been effective picking his spots, but at that age, it's a totally different ball game when you're working a 3-week tour every night. For box office, of course it's a big deal to come to a town and have a recognizable name like Tenryu on the bill, because for mainstream star power, the native side was only Kawada. The Triple Crown tournament bracketing will go like this. The first round matches are Kawada vs. Steve Williams on October 14th at Korakuen Hall, Taiokia vs. Johnny Smith on October 14th at Korakuen Hall, Jinsei Shinzaki vs. Stan Hansen on October 16th in Iwaki, and Tenryu vs. Mike Barton on October 18th in Natari. This leads to the semifinals on October 22nd in Osaka and the championship match on October 28th at Budokan Hall. Looking at the way it's lined up, one has to figure semifinals of Kawada vs. Kia and Hansen vs. Tenryu, and probably a Kawada, he has to at least be in the finals, versus Tenryu match. Kawada vs. Tenryu, which probably hasn't taken place in 11 years or more, because when Tenryu was in All Japan, Kawada was his junior member tag team partner in a group called Revolution. On its own should pack Budokan, but the appearance of Onita as well will make it All Japan's third straight big success in the building since the promotional split. Pro Wrestling Noah. Vader was scheduled to return next month, but now it appears that Vader, sensing the opportunity to be part of a lucrative interpromotional program with New Japan, is wanting back with All Japan. They debuted on September 24 in Kyoto, packing the 1,400-seat building. Tickets sold out in 20 minutes, for a show with no major angles, going with Kobashi and Takao Omori. The current major angle is Kobashi and Omori forming a tag team, and Takeshi Rikyo over Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa and Daisuke Ikeda in the main event. They packed the 1,802nd Furitsu Gym in Osaka on September 25, but again just ran a regular lineup but did shoot an angle in the main event where Akiyama and Kentaro Shiga and Yoshihiro Takayama beat Kobashi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Takeshi Rikyo. Akiyama after the match was over, but Kobashi in the figure 4, which of course is a big heat deal since Kobashi is back in the ring way too fast after surgery on both knees. While he was in the figure 4, Takayama did a double knee drop onto Kobashi's knees. Omori made the save, hitting former tag partner Takayama with his axe bomber. Omori asked Kobashi to team with him, but Kobashi said he wanted Akiyama in a singles match first, which may be on October 7th at Differ Ariake. The company has now sold out its first 8 house shows, but has yet to run a major-sized arena, and the company is still a novelty in the cities it has run. Masashi Aoyagi, a former karate star who did a martial arts gimmick first as Atsushi Onita's first opponent when he started what turned into FMW in the late 80s and later was part of the Skinheads Hill group in New Japan in the mid-90s, was at the Kyoto show talking with Misawa and is expected to join this group. New Japan. They are trying to build a marketing campaign around familiarizing the public with the SXW term for strong style extreme wrestling. I know it should be SU, but everyone wants to copy the ECW rhythm chant, and X is cooler than E as a letter. Fujita is said to be headed to Russia after the Olympics November, to train under Alexander Karelin, which at least makes a good story. It also could be a way to get Karelin into Pride next year, since Alexander Otska is going on the trip. Shinjiro Otani is now working in England under the name Mr. Otani on a fall tour for All-Star Wrestling billed as WrestleMania UK Tour, which may get the WWF lawyers in a bunch given they own the name and trademark worldwide, and the promotion frequently uses wrestlers billed as top WWF talent as tributes in fine print in the ads. Many New Japan stars early in their careers, including Satoru Sayama, Akira Maeda, Keiichi Yamada, Liger, Masakatsu Funaki, Hiroyoshi Yamamoto, Tenzan, Akira Nagami and Satoshi Kojima all worked England. In the October 9th opener at the Dome with Hashimoto vs. Fujinami, apparently Hashimoto will come to the ring with no fancy ring entrance, no ring outfit or ring music to denote him starting out as a preliminary wrestler with no fanfare. Fujinami also said that he would use the Dragon Suplex in this bout. Fujinami popularized the move in the late 70s, but rarely used it after the mid-80s. Minoru Tanaka is out with a leg injury, although he has been announced for the October tour. There are several decent-sized shows, but none with lineups that jump out at you on that tour. October 12th in Osaka has Dr. Wagner Jr. and Kendo Kashin vs. Tanaka and Koji Kanemoto, Brian Johnston vs. Michiyoshi Ohara, Yuji Nagata vs. Tatsutoshi Goto, and Yutaka Yoshi and Manabu Nakanishi vs. Scott Norton and Masahiro Chono. October 18th in Nagasaki has Kanemoto vs. Wagner Jr., Liger and Samurai vs. Shinya Makabe and Tanaka, Johnston vs. Don Fry, Yoshi vs. Kojima, Nagata and Nakanishi vs. Ohara and Goto. October 20th in Fukuoka has Makabe vs. Wagner, Liger vs. Takaiwa non-title, Yoshi and Johnston and Nakanishi and Nagata vs. Kojima and Tenzan and Chono and Norton. Final show of the tour is October 29th in Kyoto with Takaiwa vs. Tanaka, Liger vs. Kanemoto, Yoshi and Johnston and Nakanishi vs. Fry and Norton and Chono and Sasaki vs. Nagata. Liger went to the September 24th Osaka Pro Wrestling show in Osaka at NGK Studio to build up his Tokyo Dome match against Super Delphin. Liger said beating Delphin would be easy and challenged Osaka Pro Wrestling to bring 5 guys to the Dome and he'd face them in a 1-on-5 match. Liger attacked Delphin after Delphin had beaten Kishinbo Kamen. Delphin said that he would be bringing 4 Osaka Pro wrestlers with him to the Dome show. Liger also said his goal is to win the IWGP Heavyweight title. September 9th TV show still only aired matches from the G1 tournament. In particular, it was a collection of Liger and Takaiwa singles matches, with the theme of junior heavyweights challenging the heavyweight stars. The upside is that both are great workers, so almost all the matches range from good to very good, and it was a very good TV show. New Japan TV over the past 2 months, quality-wise, has been very good. It's just that it's lacked new material, and it's all the G1 stuff that has been so good. You have to get the old Liger out of your mind when viewing this Liger, who looks like a heavyweight because he's so ridiculously huge. like this 5'4" tank, with his triceps, chest and shoulders borderline freaky now. He's not the 90s high flyer of course, but the show with multiple matches showed he's still someone who can get a good match out of anyone and is a hell of a worker, just not at the junior style. Takaiwa is better at the junior style playing a powerhouse, but it doesn't work well with heavyweight because such a small guy can't play powerhouse, but most of his matches were still good. They aired Liger vs Fujinami, good match, good heat, which says something that Liger can carry Fujinami to a 3¼ stars match these days. Chono vs Takaiwa, fans didn't think Takaiwa had a prayer of winning but they built it and this was a really good match with great heat down the stretch, which speaks volumes for Takaiwa to pull 3½ stars out of Chono. Takaiwa vs Junji Hirata, another good match for Takaiwa against an uncharismatic usually blah opponent. Liger vs Takashi Iizuka, only the last few minutes aired but it looked really good. Liger vs Tatsutoshi Goto, they aired almost the entire match. Not much heat because nobody cares about Goto, but Liger did carry it and it was about 2¾ stars. Unlike all the previous matches where Liger and Takaiwa lost every time, Liger got the pin after a brainbuster and Sumo Hall exploded. Probably the best Goto singles match in a long time. Takaiwa vs Yutaka Yoshi. Yoshi looked like a clumsy huge guy. This match didn't click and was the only bad match on the show. Liger vs Nagata, they only showed the last few minutes but what aired looked very good, and Takaiwa vs Koshinaka, Takaiwa got the upset here. Not much heat early but it built with a good Hurricane Rana finish that popped the crowd huge, probably 3¼ stars. Two other very interesting cultural things on the show which show the difference between US and Japanese wrestling, whether good or bad is just a matter of personal preference. They plugged a new DVD New Japan has just released. The DVD had the original entrance music of Tiger Mask and was a best of Tiger Mask tape. They plugged you get his original matches including matches with the Dynamite Kid. Here's the catch. Every match on this tape was between 1981-83. Could you imagine WWF or WCW plugging a video of a wrestler who hasn't even worked regularly for the promotion in 17 years airing matches from 2 decades earlier? Not sure if it's chicken or the egg. Nostalgia plays better in Japan because the fans are more into history, or the promotions have, through their booking, made history important, and thus that allows them to market history and make a profit off bringing the old back as new. They also showed a brief clip from Sumo Hall where they introduced the Japanese Olympic wrestling team, which, again, is something I wouldn't expect to happen at a WWF or WCW TV taping. September 16 TV did a 3.2 rating. Other Japan notes. FMW drew an announced crowd of 6,200 in Sapporo at the Tsukisame Dome on September 21 for its major fall show headlined by Hayabusa vs Koto Fuyuki in a 15,000-volt electric dynamite cage thunderbolt death match. After 3 explosions, Hayabusa power-bombed Fuyuki into the cage and won with a Firebird 450 slash. This built up a match for Fuyuki's Wu title, which was the marathon match on the September 26 pay-per-view show. Geto and Jado won the Wu Hardcore Tag titles in a 3-way dance over Mammoth, formerly Yoshinori, Sasaki and Tetsuhiro Kuroda, who were the former champs, and Ryuji Yamakawa of Big Japan teaming with Kentaro Kanemura of FMW. The company then ran a live pay-per-view show on Samurai TV on September 26 from Korakuen Hall. In the highlights, Mr. Ganasuke attacked Tetsuhiro Kuroda with a baseball bat before a scheduled tag match with Ganasuke and Goemon vs Kuroda and Onryo. At first, Kuroda couldn't come out. A former Major League Baseball player in Japan named Naito was at ringside as manager for Kuroda when he finally came out. Ganasuke ended up pinning Kuroda with another bat shot. Ganasuke then said he doesn't like Entertainment Pro Wrestling, which is FMW's new motto under Booker Koto Fuyuki. President Shoichi Arai came out and basically defended the new style and said the fans came out to see the new style. Ganasuke lariated Arai, who then fired Ganasuke. The main event was a marathon match which saw Fuyuki and Hayabusa end at 3 falls each after 60 minutes. Fuyuki took Hayabusa's mask off at the 31 minutes mark and Hayabusa juiced. It was tied 3-3 at the 44-37 match when Hayabusa scored a pin after 2 Firebird splashes. Fuyuki used chairs and tables but it was one near fall after another until the end of the match. The two hugged when it was over and Hayabusa asked for a rematch on the next pay-per-view, which will be November 12th from Yokohama Bunka Gym. The return of the Road Warriors to Japan started with the Battle Earth show on September 23rd at Differ Ariake. However, Hawk is still unable to wrestle due to cardiomyopathy, heart problems, and it'll be at least 6 months before he'd be able to wrestle. Hawk came to Japan to work as a second for Animal since Battle Earths had sold the shows to local promoters for a Road Warrior return. Animal on the tour is teaming with Alexander Otsuka as Road Warrior Alex. They debuted as a team beating Yuki Ishikawa and Naoki Sano in 2:26 before an announced crowd of 1,277. Otsuka also wrestled under his own name in the semi-final, beating Osamu Tashiakari, who also fought in the Pride tournament as did Otsuka this past year. Dos Caras is coming into Battlers. On the women's side, Yoshiko Tamura retained her NWA Pacific and Neo Ladies title, beating Takako Inoue on September 22 in Tokyo for Neo Ladies. That same day in Sendai, Asia Kong retained the Queen of Version belt over Mima Shimoda, and on September 23 in Kawasaki, Lioness Asuka retained the TWA title for the JD promotion over Megumi Yabushida. Momoe Nakanishi and Nani Takahashi retained the WWA tag titles over Miho Wakizawa and Keo Nomi in the main event of the AJW show on September 23 at Hakata Star Lanes, which was a February 3 fall match that went almost 30 minutes. September 13 NTV Wrestling News Show did a 1.4 rating. Here and there. Billy Joyce, who was a huge star in England during a wrestling boom period in the 1960s, passed away on September 15 at the age of 65. We don't have any more details on it. Joyce held the British heavyweight title for Joint Promotions, also known as the Admiral Lord Mount Evans Gold Belt for promoter Dale Martin, on 6 occasions as the dominant heavyweight champion in the country from 1958 to 1967. Joyce in many ways was the transition heavyweight champion between legendary shooters Bert Asarati, who dominated from 1938-60 and some legends have him as the toughest wrestler of all time, and Billy Robinson, who first won the title from Joyce in 1966, but didn't have a long reign because he ventured to North America in 1970, and was legendary during his day for his technique and currently trains aspiring wrestlers in Japan. Joyce's title wins were over Gordon Nelson, Steve's father, and later a longtime Amarillo star shooter before working the past few decades as a member of the WCW ring crew before suffering a stroke last year. In 1958, Ernie Baldwin in 1959, Dennis Mitchell in 1960. Jeff Ports, Scott McGee's father, another of the old-time shooters who also came to the U.S. in the early 70s as the tail end of his career, in 1964, Gwen Davis in 1966 and Ian Campbell, later Black Angus Campbell, who was a big star in Kansas City and St. Louis doing a powerhouse routine, but wasn't much in the ring, in 1966 before dropping it for good in 1967 to Robinson. The Blitzkrieg, who wrestled on the Australian Wrestling Federation tour with Psychosis and 2 Cold Scorpio as the headliners, was not Jeremiah Ross, the Blitzkrieg in WCW, as reported here. It was another California wrestler wearing the costume. Regarding the World Sumo Wrestling League story, which actually has gotten a fair amount of response and curiosity, it is not a done deal, but there are talks regarding it. The proposed debut date on Fox and starting of the TV tapings and house show tour have been moved back from November to January. There is still talk of Atsushi Onita wrestling Sabu for XPW, and XPW gets its building situation straightened out in the Los Angeles market. Regarding Toru Tanaka, there were some reports that Tanaka began wrestling as Taro Miyagi in the 60s. Taro Miyagi and Toru Tanaka were two different people. Miyagi, also a Hawaiian, wrestled in the Midwest before Tanaka broke in and ended up making it big in real estate after getting out of pro wrestling. A couple of additions to Tanaka's title history. Tanaka beat Ron Fuller to win the Old Southern title in Memphis on February 12, 1979 in Memphis before losing it on April 23, 1979 in Memphis to the Mongolian Stomper. Tanaka and Robert Fuller won a tournament for the vacant Southern Tag Team titles on January 22, 1979 in Memphis, beating Dennis Condrey and Don Carson. Tanaka and Fuller teased dissension their entire few-week reign and ended up splitting up a few weeks later. On May 14, 1979, Tanaka and Mr. Fuji beat Robert Fuller and Bill Dundee, and dropped the belts on June 4, 1979 to Dundee and Jerry Lawler. Mike Rapata, Colorado Kid, won the NWA Heavyweight Title Tournament on September 19 in Tampa, winning an abbreviated tournament since both Joe Malenko, minor surgery, and Greg Valentine, announced as trans problems, no-showed. Rapata beat Hector Guerrero in his first-round match and Jerry Flynn in the finals before being attacked after the win by Sabu, which sets up a match between the two of them on October 17 in Tampa. The title was most recently held by Naoya Ogawa, who vacated it since he got whatever he wanted out of it. Dory Funk worked the show, putting protege Adam Windsor over, and Florida vet Steve Kieran beat Brian Blair to keep their program going with Kieran as the heel. Rapata defends on the NWA 52nd anniversary show weekend on October 14th, in Nashville against WCW's Chris Harris on a weekend where NWA reps from around the world. Literally, there's a match even coming from England, get together for a Saturday night followed by a Sunday afternoon show at the fairgrounds. It appears that the deal is that because the Nashville group will get the NWA title, that the North American title, which Rapata held and has now vacated, which the Nashville group has been using as its top singles title for years, will be moved to either NWA Jersey or NWA PWX. Pittsburgh area VH1 is preparing a 1-hour television special tentatively set for November on the history of pro wrestling and music. More on the All-Star Wrestling Tour of England for October. Besides Mr. Otani, Shinjiro Otani, also appearing for promoter Brian Dixon will be Yokozuna Marty Jannetty and Greg Valentine. Currently wrestling for the group include wrestlers billed as Legend of Doom, Johnny South, who has actually used that name as a fake Road Warrior gimmick for years, the original Undertaker, who wasn't original Sergeant Slaughter, who wasn't Bob Remus, and Kendo Nagasaki. Nagasaki actually is the original Kendo Nagasaki. The more famous in the US and Japan Kendo Nagasaki, Kazuo Sakurada, was given the name after the masked British heel of the 60s and 70s, who was something of a legendary character in England in those days. Sakurada got the name when he wrestled in Florida in the early 80s from Dusty Rhodes, after the already legendary British grappler. Many, over the years, have confused the British legend as the Japanese guy, as the British masked guy was billed as Japanese but he was really British, who was trying to give himself a great Kabuki-like opponent in Florida after Rhodes and Kabuki had a strong feud in Georgia, but he didn't get Kabuki into Florida. Also working on the tour is a wrestler with a ring named Davy Jones. Maybe Russo can bring him in as well, and former 70s California star Pat Roach, who after leaving pro wrestling became somewhat well known as a major motion picture actor. Didn't hear much about the September 16th Women of Wrestling first TV tapings at the Great Western Forum other than they sold no tickets at all and whoever was there was papered. Wrestling Hall of Famer Johnny Valentine, Greg's father, underwent surgery on September 15th on his back. Ricky Nelson had a Paul Orndorff-type scare on September 19th at a show in North Pole, Alaska on an Air Force base. Nelson was working with the Eagle, All Japan's George Hines, and gave him a Frankensteiner, but in the flip-over, at the top of his head on the mat and was knocked out. His eyes closed and he was unconscious for about 2 minutes or more. A memorial show for Frank Podzilla Podbielski, who passed away 2 weeks back in a motorcycle accident, will take place on October 14th in his hometown of Tuckerton, New Jersey, where he was a police officer at Pinelands Region High School. James St. Jean, the evil promoter featured in the MTV Pro Wrestling special that featured Leigh Thatcher and Tony Atlas, has sold his Eastern Wrestling Alliance to a group of its wrestlers led by Steve Rand, who wrestles in the area as Steve Ramsey, and Joshua Shea. The first show by the new promoters was on September 22nd. St. Jean started promoting EVA in 1997. Thomas Simpson, who promotes Omega Pro Wrestling, the Carolina indie group that the Hardys, Lita, Shannon Moore and Shane Helms all came from, was a finalist for the South Carolina Governor's Professor of the Year Award. Simpson is a math professor at the University of South Carolina. Kurt Hennig is now working for WWC in Puerto Rico. When Steve Bradley goes to Memphis in mid-October, that would be the least piece of WWF talent working the IWA Puerto Rico promotion. Benoit and Jericho are booked to headline the IWA show on September 30th in Guaynabo, Puerto Rico. They had planned to do a Bruiser Brody Cup tournament in October in IWA, but it wasn't coming together fast enough and there was a lack of response in general from top talent interested in being part of a benefit show. The current plan is to try and do it over Thanksgiving weekend. Marty Jannetty, Bushwhackers and a Doink the Clown, billed as former WWF stars, will be working with the Wrestling Alliance promotion in the UK in the fall. I guess to avoid a political fight about running in New Jersey, All Pro Wrestling has moved its 3rd anniversary show to November 18th at the Viking Hall, ECW Arena, in Philadelphia, headlined by a tag team tournament. WWF announcer Kevin Kelly wrestled on Jim Kettner's Iqua show on September 23rd in Newport, Delaware, teaming with the Haas brothers as the Connecticut Connection, beating Ty Street and Cheetah Master. Reckless Youth was on the show, but didn't wrestle and did a gimmick where he was looking to get booked. They aired a taped interview at the show where Kelly said he wasn't going to appear as scheduled, and suddenly, Rock appeared on the screen, which, considering it was a surprise, got the response you'd expect, basically calling Kelly Hermie like he did some time back on WWF TV and ordering him to appear. Christopher Daniels is being brought in for 3 shows by Iqua on October 14th in Laurel, Delaware at the high school, October 21st back at St. Matthew's Parish Hall in Newport, Delaware, and November 25th in Newark, Delaware at the University of Delaware Carpenter Center. MMA. Pro wrestler and former 1976 Olympic wrestler Yoshiaki Yatsu's opponent at the October 31st Pride show will be Gary Goodridge. Sakuraba, who was advertised as being on the show, said that he didn't want to fight Ryan Gracie, and that the only other Gracie that he is interested in fighting is Hickson. Pride wants Sakuraba on the show as a Japanese star because at this point neither Naoya Ogawa or Kazuyuki Fujita will appear. So aside from Yatsu Curiosity, the only draw is Takada. The October 31st show won't be airing on pay-per-view in the United States. The reason being given is that it is only going to be a 7-match show and will be a Japanese-oriented card without any American draws. At this point, the subsequent show on December 23rd from the Ariake Coliseum, which they are hopeful of getting a Mark Coleman vs. Fujita match as the headliner, will air on pay-per-view in the US in January. The August 27th Seibu Dome Americanized pay-per-view, which was really hot, will air on Viewers' Choice Canada on October 6th. There are Brazilian newspaper reports that a fight broke out between Ryan Gracie, fresh off the win over Kendo Kashin at the last Pride show, and Walid Ismail, best known for his choking out Royce Gracie in a submissions-only match in Brazil in 1998. Ismail, who has marketed himself in magazine ads for his tapes as the Gracie Killer, has had bad blood with Ryan Gracie, and the two at one point were scheduled for a match in Georgia that never came off. The reports were that the two were at a party when Gracie came from behind and allegedly struck Ismail in the side of the head. Ismail turned around, Gracie shot in, and Ismail supposedly choked him out. There haven't been any stories around that dispute this story from the Gracie side other than Gracie may not have been in what one would call his best condition when the fight started, but he was the one who started it, so that hardly qualifies as an excuse. The Evansville, Indiana-based Hook and Shoot promotion is now affiliated with Shudo in Japan. Shudo had been working with Super Brawl in Hawaii, but Shudo promoter TJ Thompson recently promoted a show and has judged shows for Rings. Shudo doesn't want anyone affiliated with their promotion to have an affiliation with Rings because Rings is still considered pro wrestling in Japan, even though Rings of late has gone to an all-shoot format, and they don't want to be painted as part of the pro wrestling industry. Some of the top Shudo fighters will probably be in Evansville this year and next year, including a proposed date with Ruben Asado for next year. Mikey Burnett, who lost a very close and disputed decision to Pat Miletic in a UFC lightweight title match in 1998 and has of late tried his luck in boxing, is considering returning to MMA. Burnett wants to fight in Pride, but to them he's a nobody and they first want him to score a win against a major name such as Carlos Newton or Jose Pele Landi. Hiromitsu Kanehara withdrew from the Rings USA finals due to a rib injury and will be replaced by Josh Hall, who placed 4th in his weight class at the recent Olympic trials and lost a very controversial split decision to Kanehara in an awesome match in Hawaii. Pancrase ran a big show on September 24th at Yokohama Bunka Gym before 3,000 to 3,500, crowning its first light heavyweight and middleweight champions. The building was about 70% full, but they put far less seats on the floor in the stage so make the smaller audience less noticeable, as compared with the Gia show in the same building last week where they had seats everywhere and it was sold out. Yamamiya won the light heavy strap with a win over Omar Buish in 6:46 with a front guillotine and a decision over Ikuiza Minowa. Yamamiya and Minowa went 10 minutes to a draw, but Yamamiya dominated the overtime period to win. Yamamiya, who was in Tokumitsu Ishizawa's corner at the Seibu Dome show in his loss to Ryan Gracie, then challenged Ryan Gracie after the title win. Nathan Marquardt won the middleweight title with a surprise unanimous decision over Kyuma Kunyoku. It appeared this tournament was actually created as a way to get Kunyoku over as a champion, and another decision over Shoni Carter where they drew in regulation and Marquardt won the overtime. In a Valley Tudo rules match, Kengo Watanabe, now simply known as Kengo, the former rugby star the company at one point was so high on because of his size and look, but who then proceeded to get beaten in most of his fights, scored a decision win over 42-year-old journeyman Joe Charles. Kengo was considered the biggest draw of the show and a lot of fans left after his match. Main event saw Sami Schultz retain the King of Pancrase title when the ref stopped the match with Asami Shibuya in 8:55 when Schultz was pounding his face on the ground. Pancrase pioneer Minoru Suzuki, who started the company in the ring with Ken Shamrock and Masakatsu Funaki, tried another comeback on the show but had to concede in 3:43 due to a neck injury. Suzuki simply took too much punishment in fights years ago and in recent years has taken even more punishment with a shell of his former skills. There are now plans to have 2 retirement ceremonies for Funaki, one on December 9th in Aomori, where Funaki is from, and another the next day at Tokyo Budokan Hall, which is a very ambitious undertaking for this company. K1, which has in the past done all open weight fights, is expanding to include weight classes on November 1st with a middleweight show broadcast on NTV which will be headlined by Alex Gong. Because it'll be all middleweights, it's an experiment big time on TV running with none of the big name draws fighting. ECW. The only stuff known at press time for the October 1st pay-per-view from St. Paul is Credible vs. Lynn for the title, Rhino vs. Van Dam for the TV title, Cyrus vs. Gertner, which no doubt will be kept very short, Corino vs. C.W. Anderson in a number 1 contenders match, and most likely FBI defending the tag titles against Whipwreck and Tajiri. At press time, Tajiri's visa situation was not straightened out, so it could end up being Whipwreck and Psychosis, based on a TV angle, but there is fear because Psychosis has had more bad matches than good of late, even though he did have probably the company's best match of the year with Tajiri a few weeks back. Psychosis' work of late has been compared with that of Sabu at the end of his run here, but he doesn't have the aura Sabu had with the audience where they'd overlook his sloppiness. Super Crazy's situation won't be straightened out in time for the pay-per-view, but they are hopeful of him being in by the November show. The hope at this point was to get 3,500 for St. Paul and block the building so it looks good, but it appears there's no way they can come close to selling out the 6,000-seat arena. At one point, WCW was running the new building in St. Paul on October 2nd for Nitro, pulling out of a West Coast swing, but the decision was changed and Nitro and Thunder are in San Francisco, Cow Palace and Long Beach instead of St. Paul and Fargo. The December New York pay-per-view is close to sold out, while Chicago has about 1,600 tickets sold so far for November. When watching the TNN show backstage on September 22nd, while the wrestlers were at the show over the weekend, when they ended the show talking about being back next week with the three-way, the wrestlers all thought it was just something they were saying and nobody had a clue they were staying on TNN. Dreamer doesn't have a torn rotator cuff, but it isn't clear what shoulder problem he does have other than he's in a lot of pain and will be out for some time. They taped Hardcore TV on September 22nd in Salem, New Hampshire. Nova called out Chetty, who came out limping and told Nova due to a back injury suffered he can't wrestle him. Blue Boy then attacked Nova to set up a match. Chetty interfered in the match, so Blue Boy went over. Nova laid out Jasmine St. Clair after the match, but Chetty then laid Nova out with a chair. This wound up with Jazz and Protojet starting an impromptu match. Protojet won when Bilvis Wesley interfered. This led to more run-ins, building up a Falls Count Anywhere 6-man. Whipwreck beat Psychosis in a match said to be very disappointing. Psychosis got really bad reviews all weekend. The FBI attacked both of them afterwards until During and Roadkill made the save. The idea of the angle was to set up FBI versus Whipwreck and Psychosis for a potential program, but that may not materialize. FBI beat During and Roadkill due to interference of Sal E. Graziano. They did a local angle where Lou E. dangerously turned on local radio DJ Blacksmith and ripped the station's morning programming. Blacksmith said some naughty words back in response and when jumped by Anderson and Wesley. Victory, who got a big face push over the weekend, made the save, and Victory and Blacksmith beat dangerously and Wesley and Anderson when Blacksmith got to use the people's elbow. Mahoney beat Money in what was said to be a really hot street fight match. Mahoney was beating on Money using cups, which saw literally tons of people throwing cups to the ring for Mahoney to use. It started funny but eventually got out of control when the ref got mad when a cup knocked him in the head. They did the TV open with Gertner and dangerously going at it verbally. Gertner hit dangerously, which led to Cyrus beating up Gertner. Styles cleared the ring with a chair. Credible and Rhino and heel ref Danny Daniels beat Corino and Lynn and face ref H.C. Locke and enter good bloody brawl when Anderson interfered. Van Dam and Cash beat Baldy's on top. The next night in Danbury they did a run-through of the pay-per-view match with Corino versus Anderson. It was said to be a match that should come off good on pay-per-view, although the crowd heat was disappointing. Said to be because they were doing a wrestling match and it was mainly a blood crowd. Credible kept the title over Victory in what was said to be good as a brawl around the building when dangerously hit Victory with a cell phone. Anton Bad Ribs is expected to be ready for Sunday. Nothing special to the September 22nd TNN show. They did the regular opening for Mississauga, Ontario, ending with Lynn, Credible and Corino coming out to set up a three-way. Spike Dudley came out to announce a guest ref, but before he could, Rhino attacked him. New Jack came out and was destroying Credible with weapons until Rhino cut him off, and Credible and Rhino left New Jack laying with a bunch of cane shots. New Jack, who is nowhere near ready to return, seemed like a totally broken down guy. They showed clips of Whipwreck versus Cash, which saw Rhino spear both guys and piledrive Whipwreck to set up Cash versus Rhino. Rhino put him through a table and quickly pinned him and then challenged RVD. Van Dam came out and the two had a pull apart. They showed a clip of Hamrick versus Nova. Hamrick looks old and thin but he can work. Nova got the pin with the Kryptonite Crunch. After the match, Chetty laid Nova out with a chair and lariated Jazz. Chetty did a promo, which brought out Balls Mahoney when Chetty claimed nobody could swing a chair better than he could. Baldy's attacked Balls until Chilly Willy made the save. TV main saw FBI retain the belts over during and Roadkill. Everyone worked hard. Match was kind of rough, but they did a lot of near falls and the crowd was really into it. The announcing by Joey Styles was so annoying. There it is. The buggy bag. The buggy bag. Sally Graziano choke slammed during and splashed on him and put Guido on top for the pin. After the match, they introduced the three-way, which they claimed would be the main event, and the show went off the air with them announcing to pretty much everyone's surprise that the match would air next week. WCW. September 25th Nitro from the Nassau Coliseum was a major disappointment given all the hype literally for months of this date being targeted as WCW's latest big chance. Big Vito DDQ Johnny the Bull in what was billed as an I Quit Stick vs. Stick match. With all the money the company is losing, they are introducing yet another woman, billed as Vito's sister Maria. Reno came out and right in front of the ref was pounding on Vito with a bat. Maria then got up from ringside and hit the ring. Reno froze and the match ended. Apparently they are either going to say that Reno used to have a relationship with Vito's sister and that's the backstory that has been alluded to all this time, or that Reno and Vito are actually secret brothers. David Flair spent the entire show looking for the father. He supposedly knew who it was, and was traveling around looking for an address. He finally got into a house and asked where the guy was, and it turned out he went to the house next door. When he went to the real house, as the showtime was running down, he was told the owner hasn't been around for a week. It was such comedy to see them banter back and forth, and never say whose house David was going to other than the father. Jarrett and Scott Steiner came out for an interview. Steiner yelled at Jumbo Elliott, a football player with the New York Jets, to set up a later angle literally put together at the last minute. Russo and Boresh, in the role of Russo's lackey, came out. Russo did a total face promo since they were in Nassau. He got cheered, but the cheers weren't overwhelming. Goldberg and Sting came out basically saying they had bookers back in the cage match. Mike Sanders was backstage doing the Just Joe gimmick. Jindrak and O'Haire won the tag team battle royal over Kaz Hayashi and Jamie San, Mysterio Jr., and Guerrero Harris twins, Moore and Helms and Loco and Cajun to win the tag titles. The gimmick was that Russo was punishing Chronic by not letting them in. Basically Chronic came out a few minutes in and dumped the Harris twins, Jamie San, Moore and Cajun. Security then came out and maced Chronic. Conan, doing commentary, acted stunned that they sold the mace, actually using those terms. With everyone out except Mysterio Jr. and Guerrero versus O'Haire and Jindrak, it got real good. Disco hit Guerrero with the disco duck and pulled him over the top. Conan then chased Disco to the back. They put Mysterio Jr. on the top rope and Jindrak came off the top with a clothesline, and he went to the floor being eliminated. Howard Stern's Whack Pack was doing a promo that was interrupted by Nash, as coach of the Thrillers. Nash is the smartest man in wrestling. Some of the Thrillers, O'Haire and Palumbo in particular, are probably going to be huge stars, and Nash as their mentor, can legitimately say he helped them out and they'll have loyalty to him because of it and it'll add years to his career longevity. If you look at both companies, you'll realize that the only people who don't believe the adage that winning and losing no longer matters are the guys with the most political power who know that even to this day it still does, because somehow they do the least amount of losing. Awesome beat ICP in a handicap match. Violent J put over his JCW guys in his interview. They ended up brawling to the top of the bus where Awesome power bombed Shaggy. He fell off the bus to the floor and Awesome climbed down and pinned him. Cat and Ms. Jones came out. Sanders was beating up Cat when the Thrillers came out and they all laid Cat out. The bikini contest was really lame. Pamela Paulshock won, which turned out to be a major source of heat. They held a beauty contest as part of kicking off ticket sales in Las Vegas that went really well. Paulshock no-showed it. At first with the story going around she had an ankle injury. Apparently the real story was that since she wasn't going over, she wasn't going. The rest of the women, or at least some of them seeing that attitude, were really upset that on the TV version, which was far more important, to get her to do it, she was promised the win, basically being rewarded for her no-show. Welcome to the wrestling business. Duggan came out and covered Major Guns up because she wasn't being a good representative of Canada. She said she was American. Whatever country she's from, she's the worst actress in that country. Paulshock and Okerlund were the MCs, and then Paulshock said she was getting hot, took off her coat revealing a bikini top with giant implants, and the Whack Pack guys all said she was the winner even though she wasn't in it. The reason some of the women didn't disrobe as much as you'd think is because some of them were uncomfortable with it, and being compared with fitness models who know the tricks like Tori Wilson and Tylene Buck, even women with good figures can get intimidated. Goldberg attacked Steiner. Disco did an interview saying basically he was out of the Filthy Animals. Actually, he said the other guys were begging him to let them back in the Filthy Animals and had a new partner. Instead of Alex Wright, Steiner came out and destroyed him and challenged Goldberg. Goldberg agreed if it was a cage match and that nobody would interfere. The cage came down. They had a pretty heated match. It was good, but nowhere near the level of their previous bout.
Can you believe they gave away this cage match without even advertising it in advance or making it the TV main event?
So much for drawing big money at Starrcade. At least when Bischoff gave away Hogan vs. Goldberg, he hyped it to death on Thunder beforehand and it did set a record attendance. Granted, that show was going to anyway, but it did result in a back jump in sales over the last few days, while pissing away what would have been $7 million for that match on pay-per-view at that point in time. By giving away the cage, I'm not sure how much they're pissing away on pay-per-view, since they make so little from it nowadays, but they didn't even hype it ahead of time. Midaja came out with a lead pipe and walked right in the door. Why even have a cage? Steiner used it, but Elliott wouldn't let him out the door to win. Goldberg then speared Steiner and left the cage to win in 4:44. Backstage, Jarrett hit Beetlejuice, a strange-looking very short man wearing a superhero costume from the Stern Show, with a guitar shot. Jarrett beat Rection. Storm and Skipper tried to interfere, but they were the setup men getting beaten up for Duggan to get the heat with a 2x4 shot on Rection, leading to Jarrett winning with the stroke. They did a 4-on-1 on Rection, with Jarrett putting him in the figure 4. The rest of MIA tried and failed to make a save, as they got Punk to set up Sting coming out and cleaning house with a bat. Sting beat Storm in what was technically a good match in 4:18 with a Scorpion Death Drop. Sting did allow Storm to reverse a Scorpion Deathlock into the half crab and gave him a dramatic rope break. Storm's US-Canadian title was never brought up, so this must have been a non-title match. For those of you who were betting on this, Storm's losing and regaining the title over the weekend and the matches with Funk were also not ever acknowledged on TV. So much for pissing off the few people in those cities who bought tickets.
Main event was the cage match with Russo vs. T. Russo wore a football helmet to protect his head.
The entire locker room came out, because they were expecting to see a Flair vs. Steamboat Classic. Russo destroyed T with a bat for a few minutes. At one point Russo tried to climb out the top, but Awesome climbed up and Sting came from the ceiling, and Bret Hart wasn't even booked on the show, and he fell back into the ring. Luger showed up and gave Russo a pipe through the cage. Russo KO'd Mickey J with a pipe. Flair, disguised as a security guy, got into the cage when they were carrying out Jay and attacked Russo and put him in the figure 4. Because Flair can't train yet after surgery, he's gotten really heavy and never should have appeared on TV until he was ready.
There's a reason guys wait a few weeks after being cleared to lift before they want on TV, because the fans judge you harshly if you're not in shape, and with Flair, because of his age, he's got even more going against him. Half the world got involved. Goldberg ended up in the cage. Somewhere in this mess, Flair got punked out to set up Goldberg. Booker was ready to win but hesitated when Goldberg came out. Match ended with Booker going through the door at the same time Goldberg speared Russo through the cage, and Russo appeared to hit the guardrail pretty hard. The idea was that Russo went through the cage at the same time T went through the door, so they went off the air not knowing who won. September 26 Thunder tapings from Wilkes-Barre, PA highlights. For Worldwide, both Robbie Rage and Kevin Northcutt looked good. Neither is under contract. Steve Sharp, Aaliyah from Memphis, put over Awesome. Joan London taped an On Behind Closed Doors special. She was at the power plant, and did a really bad in-ring angle ending with her giving Medusa a snapmare. Disco came out to introduce his new partner. Conan challenged him to a match. Disco won when Alex Wright, with a shaved bald head, and acknowledged as formerly being Berlin, interfered and Mysterio Jr. and Guerrera made the save. Sanders was commissioner for the night with Cat injured, and Russo gave him power to run the show since Russo legit went back to Atlanta on Tuesday morning. They did an angle to set up a tag match. Luger apologized for what he did, saying he felt guilty all day about kissing up to the boss to get his job back. He did a face promo, but got a 50-50 reaction. Rection said everyone has done things like that in their life and Luger deserved a shot.
Most of the crowd thought Rection was a dummy for trusting Luger, and they were right. Gene Okerlund called Disco a prick. It took a million takes because the Filthy Animals and everyone kept cracking up as he delivered the line. Sanders stripped Smiley of the hardcore title. The storyline was supposed to be that Smiley would vacate it. Remember how a few weeks ago he specifically couldn't? Since Smiley wasn't there, they just stripped him and started a 4-man tourney to set up AWOL vs. Reno as the title match for either Nitro or Thunder next week. AWOL beat Johnny the Bull in a match where AWOL's head was split open badly legit, probably from the edge of a garbage can. Steiner destroyed Stevie Ray with a pipe. This was originally scripted to get Ray off commentary and put Borash in. Borash actually legit went back to Atlanta with Russo, so instead Conan got the spot. Lava Lamp Lounge ended with Midaja and Leah Meow doing another horrible cat fight. Jindrak and O'Hare kept the tag titles over Duggan and Skipper when AWOL interfered and Duggan and AWOL brawled to the back, which sounds scary. They doubled and pinned Skipper. Sanders then announced he'd face Skipper for the Cruiserweight title on Nitro from the Cow Palace in SF. In order to give Skipper a tune-up, he booked him against the Acolytes, Chronic, in a handicap bout, and of course they destroyed and pinned him. Mysterio Jr. and Guerrero agreed to do a best-of-5 series to determine the top contender for the Cruiser title. Unfortunately, just 2 minutes into the match, Guerrero blew out his right knee on the floor. He was actually scheduled to win this match to go up 2-0, but the match just ended when he couldn't continue. Fans booed, which got Conan, on commentary, legit upset because Guerrero appeared to be hurt badly. It is believed to not be as serious as first thought, either a knee sprain or a knee hyperextension. Reno beat Crowbar in the other hardcore title semifinal. Reno and Johnny doubled on Crowbar, who was depressed upon hearing the word that Daphne and Ozzy have already left for Australia. Awesome made the save as they want to put Awesome and Crowbar as a tag team. Nothing against Crowbar, who deserves a push, but doesn't anybody see that Awesome is main event material? Russo did a taped interview. He had the title belt and said he would never wrestle again. But on Nitro Monday, he'd announced who the new champion would be. He said he'd get back at Flair because he has something on Flair's family that Flair knows about. He went off on 10A and ordered him to wrestle a match on Nitro. That'll sure help the quality of the show. Shiner beat Ray. Maine saw Luger turn on Rection, allowing Storm and Jarrett to win the tag match. Luger was holding Jarrett, then rolled him out of the way of the moonsault. Luger then walked off, leaving Rection against both, and Storm made him submit to the half crab. September 19th Thunder tapings in Erie, Pennsylvania, which had one good match early, and well, a lot of talking. Russo maced Steiner, who didn't sell it, and they all made up afterwards. Then after they made up, Russo said he made them and he could break them. That works with Vince McMahon. But not with anyone else. Borash got to announce. Young Dragons and Leah Meow beat Sanders and Jindrak and O'Hare. Russo told someone to take a dive for him later in the show. Disco screwed up again, signing Mysterio Jr. versus Guerrero, with the idea the winner would get a Cruiserweight title shot, but the Filthy Animals hated it because they had to wrestle each other. Awesome interviewed a bunch of the women to hype the bikini contest. Russo came out to wrestle the masked heel. He did a leg drop to mock Hogan, except he was the first guy ever to do a leg drop worse than Hogan, so he mocked himself. The masked guy stopped selling, with the announcers asking why he had stopped selling. He then unmasked as Stevie Ray. Ray used the slapjack on Russo, which shows Russo has lost all of his judgment because that move ended the career of Rick Martel. Paisley pinned Wilson, but Douglas used the franchiser on Paisley after the match. Tigress ran in and Douglas was about to lay her out when the Filthy Animals ran in. Team Canada and MIAs brawled with Duggan attacking Rection's bad leg. Austin did that move on Pillman and he was out for months. They put Rection back the next day. In Russo's revenge, Chronic beat Ray in a handicap match in a horrible match. Guerrero beat Mysterio Jr. in a very good match, although nothing compared to matches these two had years ago. Disco came out with his duck, but the Filthy Animals beat them out. Harris Twins beat 3 count via DQ when Chronic interfered. All the tag teams got involved to set up the tag team battle royal. 10A went crazy on Stacy Keibler, asking her how many guys she'd been with. She said it wasn't her fault and she was the victim. Sting vs. Jarrett vs. Steiner ended without a finish. Booker came out dressed as Sting. The referee bought it. Sting put Russo in the Scorpion when Jarrett hit Sting with a guitar. Jarrett put figure 4 on Sting and Steiner put the recliner on Booker as the fake Sting. There was major heat with Mark Madden this past week. It started with several nasty emails back and forth between Madden and Dave Shearer, a writer with OneWrestling.com. Shearer a few weeks back basically blamed Madden for talking too much on the September 11th show, which happened to be the Nitro debut of Jeremy Borash, Shearer's friend, who didn't make a strong impression on his TV debut. Shearer has a major history of writing childish emails and trying to goad people into public feuds, while Madden has a rep for taking many negative criticisms into personal affronts, which in the job he has, is something he can't afford to do and remain with any level of sanity. Madden felt Shearer was negative toward him because he was using him as a scapegoat for an excuse for Borash not coming through when given the chance, and then trying to find an opening in WCW for Borash, who Russo's backing, but his work hasn't been complimented anywhere. Russo ended up giving him a new role as his lackey on the September 25th show, to get a full-time gig on Nitro or Thunder. First the emails started flying, complete with name-calling on both ends. Shearer continued to write negatively about Madden. Under nearly every circumstance, my feeling is that a performer has to be able to blow off criticism or grow from it because it's part of the job of being a performer in this business nowadays. If they respect the opinion of the person writing, they should think about it and use it constructively to improve, and they'll be better performers for it. Or if they believe it isn't warranted, they should dismiss it. If they don't respect the opinion of the person writing, they shouldn't give it a second of thought. The internet is largely amateur hour when it comes to covering news, although that wouldn't be fair as a blanket statement, as there are a few good writers out there. Whatever category one wants to place Shearer in is their own judgment, but it is totally foreign to me to send personal hate email mocking someone's weight and appearance to that person, and then be in a position to, literally days later, negatively review their professional performance, and then try to use the usual standard that a professional needs to be able to accept criticism, which largely is true, and in this situation leave it at that. There were allegations made that Shearer in one of his emails claimed he could get Madden fired from WCW. After a negative column by Shearer directed at Madden using the term Mamacita on September 18th, bringing up the term would bring to mind Eddie Guerrero and WWF, Madden responded by calling in Wrestling Observer Live unannounced on September 19th and felt much of the recent criticism of him had been personally motivated and cut a promo on Shearer. There was a meeting at the August 13th pay-per-view where the wrestlers were all told they couldn't do any media unless it was approved by the office. But it was a meeting only for talent. The announcers weren't at the meeting, nor were they ever specifically told those guidelines of having to go through the office for all media appearances apply to them, and quite frankly, some of the top-name wrestlers continue to do media not booked through the office. In the case of Madden, it would be ridiculous since aside from his wrestling persona in Pittsburgh, he has a sports talk show and regularly does local media appearances. On the show, Madden claimed that he was told by a WCW executive that Shearer had called up and actually did attempt, and failed, to get him fired. Shearer denied that in a response the next day, but never mentioned any story of him claiming in an email of what he could do and the coincidence of an exec going to Madden a few days later. Madden ended up getting major heat with Russo for a few days, not because of any of the issues and non-issues that overwhelmed whatever real issues there were with a bunch of name-calling with silly gay and fat insinuations going back and forth, but because Madden appeared on what Russo has either been convinced or has convinced himself is an enemy show. The problems, judging from the broadcast, appear to have been alleviated at Nitro, and reports are that Madden and Russo smoothed things over before the show. The Nitro Grill officially will be closing its doors on October 1st due to red ink. ICP no-showed Thunder. Hart was pulled from the Australia tour, but Flair is still scheduled to go but not wrestle. Hart is at this point scheduled for Nitro on September 25th. There has been talking of making the hardcore belt and cruiserweight belts more serious, but I can't see that happening with Russo in charge because serious title matches don't fit into his mindset. The talk has included building the cruiserweight title around a Mysterio Jr. versus Guerrero feud with the style that got it over in the first place, and building the hardcore division around people like Vampiro, who will be back full-time after his wife gives birth, and awesome after they had the strong TV bout on September 18th. Apparently there was a blow-up in the office with Russo and Dylan. Dylan, as the story goes, was on the phone talking to someone about the September 18th Nitro show, saying how stupid it was that Tigress beat 3 guys by herself in the elimination match, and that how after doing an angle that Russo had brain surgery, he showed up without his head shaved. Russo was walking by and heard the conversation and blew a gasket. Although it is believed the chances for Hall being back are greater than ever, he had not been cleared by Brad Siegel as of this week, and had never been contacted by WCW as to appearing on the Nassau Coliseum show. There are people within WCW who were claiming that Russo's idea was to put the title on himself at the Nassau show, but he was talked out of it because of how negatively it would go over within the company. Chris Condito and Tammy Sytch were at the show looking to get back in. Sytch was said to have dropped considerable weight since the last time she was in the company, but there didn't seem to be much interest in bringing either of them back. Big Dick Dudley was also at the show looking for work. The deal with Luger is that they are bringing him back as a star to feed Goldberg, to see if he'll complain about it or not. While morale among the wrestlers is the strongest it has been in a long time, among the non-wrestlers, the negativity toward Russo has probably never been stronger. It is said that at the production meetings when Russo goes over his scripts, many of the people involved roll their eyes and give each other looks showing no respect for the ideas. Many of those who have complained are being reassured that it is only a matter of time,
and not much more time before everything changes. But while that may alleviate problems regarding Russo's weaknesses, which are booking things that will lead to actually making money as opposed to desperate ratings ploys that mean nothing to the company's bottom line, that only continues the big problem in the company, in that nobody will respect authority, knowing it is only there temporarily while the wrestlers and office people who have no power are there permanently, and it just leads to a new faction backstabbing whomever else gets power. Bruno Sammartino in for Nitro at Nassau, purportedly to do an angle with Larry Zbyszko. Sammartino has said he wants nothing to do with wrestling anymore, so it didn't happen. Also on their want list, as ridiculous as this sounds, besides David Cassidy to do something with Awesome, was to bring in Peter Tork, from the TV series The Monkees in the late 60s, actually, as he was already washed up by the 70s. Ric Flair is expected to be cleared to wrestle right around November 1st. Tentatively he's scheduled to appear at the Australia shows as a goodwill ambassador type of role. Although trade journals had the show pegged for Fox, Bischoff's proposed Road Rage show was given a 9-episode order by UPN. Ticket sales for the November tour of England are as follows. The November 10th show in London has 7,400 tickets, or about 2,000 shy of capacity for a Nitro taping. November 11th in Newcastle has 3,500 sold in a 9,900-seat building for a house show. November 12th in Manchester has 5,100 tickets sold in a 20,000-seat building for Thunder. November 13th in Birmingham has 4,200 tickets sold in an 11,400-seat building for a house show. Juventud Guerrera signed a new deal this past week, so he's staying. The Jan. 14th pay-per-view show, which was originally scheduled for the Nassau Coliseum, has been moved to Indianapolis at Conseco Fieldhouse. This was the show that Russo either mistakenly or knowingly stated was the Starrcade show in that interview where he challenged John Rocker. They've also moved the February pay-per-view out of the SF Bay area, which has been a tradition the past few years, and it'll be at the Nashville Municipal Auditorium, which is the small 9,000-seat building as opposed to the larger, newer building, on March 18th, and I have a feeling this will be changed. The pay-per-view show is scheduled for Skydome in Toronto. DDP did ask for his release, but Brad Seigel didn't want to give it to him. Russo has made it clear to DDP that he only wants him to put the younger guys over, whereas DDP thinks he can still be in the world title hunt. A correction on the Orndorff story. Orndorff's career-ending neck surgery was in late 1995, not 1994, after them doing an angle where the Horseman turned on him and gave him a spike pile driver. Brian Clark did an interview this past week where he called the entire tag team division in the company a joke, saying how bad it was that they gave the two smallest guys in the company the tag titles, and that the entire FA push was all political. He also seemed pretty mad about some of the commentary Conan had been doing of late, saying how Bryan Adams got in Conan's face, and Conan said how what he was saying wasn't personal, but he believes it really is. Craig Leathers, who hadn't been at TV since Russo hadn't wanted him around, was back at Thunder on September 26th, which added more rumors to Russo's days being numbered. Conan tried to get a petition going among the wrestlers to sign as a show of support for Russo. Siegel, who was at the Nassau show, was said to be really upset about the Whack Pack. On the day of the show, all Howard Stern did what put over the WWF since Austin was his guest. Stern did mention WCW the day after the show since his guys were on the show. Apparently there is some sort of a zero-tolerance policy that Hall has to agree to if he's going to be brought back. Basically one screw-up of any kind and he's gone. Carl Olett's name is never mentioned. The fact he wasn't at Nitro in Kitchener, nor was his name ever brought up, seems to indicate it isn't the visa problems any longer as to why he's not around. WCW on its hotline did plug both Hall and DDP being at the Nassau Nitro. Thunder taping on September 19th in Erie, Pennsylvania drew about 2,000 in the building, which was 1,120 paying $26,410. House show on September 22nd in Amarillo drew 2,924 paying $61,230. September 23rd in Lubbock, Texas drew 906 paying $19,890 for basically the exact same crew. Some changes in matches because Douglas wasn't in Lubbock as scheduled, in a new building set up for 8,200. Nitro on September 25th at the Nassau Coliseum drew 4,898 fans total, which was 2,815 paid for a gate of $113,390. It may have been the lowest paid attendance for a wrestling show in the history of the Nassau Coliseum, and definitely was the lowest in the past 20 years. As best we can tell, the last time there was a major-sized, 10,000 plus capacity, arena show in the New York City market that drew less than 3,000 paid would have been during the Depression in the 1930s. Being the difference in crowds for the two shows,
it would pretty much say the Amarillo crowd should be attributed to Terry Funk wrestling in his hometown. A really scary statistic is that a house show crowd of 2,924 was the largest crowd for a non-TV taping for WCW in 3 months, and it was still less than half full in a mid-sized arena. They gave Funk a US-Canadian title win over Storm after a piledriver and a botched run-in by Skipper. Both Luger and DDP, despite not appearing on TV, received huge pops. DDP put Booker over in the title match main event both nights, which were said to be really good matches. Luger replaced Kidman in doing a job for Douglas. The MIA, despite doing the USA bid in Texas, were booed against the Filthy Animals. In Lubbock, Storm regained the title from Funk due to interference from Skipper in what was reported as the best match on the show. Funk told Storm after the match in Lubbock that it was the final match of his career. Somehow, people are skeptical. WCW does want to bring Funk back for another TV run. I do know of indie promoters that have contacted Funk of late, and he's told them he's retired. WWF. September 25th Raw from State College, Pennsylvania notes. Show opened with Austin out there with new music. He's still in his honeymoon period, I guess literally as well. This may not mean a thing, but there was a vibe wrong about him. They scripted comedy material for his interview, and his character shouldn't be doing commentary, nor should he be showing so much respect to the other faces when they stand up to him, or be shaking hands with Rock. Foley came out and had a confrontation with Austin saying to leave the investigation to him, while Austin wanted to do it himself. It sure teased a Foley heel turn. Fans didn't know how to react, but popped big at Foley's catchphrase where he mentions where they are at. Benoit came out and wanted a title shot, which Foley agreed to. Angle came out and cut a promo saying Stephanie is his friend and he forgave her. Angle cut a promo on Austin, who responded by stunning both Angle and Benoit. Kane DDQ Rikishi when both threw down the ref. No heat as people didn't know how to react to this. It was pretty bad as well. They did a post-match pull-apart. Austin confronted Undertaker with both acting like they'd be happy to wrestle each other. Taz beat Bubba Ray Dudley when Raven came out of the crowd after a ref bump, and gave Lawler a DDT as he did commentary, and then gave Bubba one. Lawler got up from the DDT on the floor and did commentary the rest of the show like nothing happened. Hardys beat Edge and Christian in a ladder match in 11:23, with it being Edge and Christian's last shot at the title if they lost. Great TV bout. Edge did a spear off a high ladder to Jeff, who was hanging by the rope that held the belts, and they both took a huge bump to the ground that just looked killer. They replayed it about 1 million times and it'll probably be on highlight tapes for the next 2 years. Matt reopened his cut. Edge did a clothesline off the ladder on Matt on the floor. Matt back suplexed Christian off the ladder and Christian came so close to whiplashing his neck on the ropes that it was scary. Edge and Christian set up the concerto on Matt, but Jeff pushed over both ladders and they took big bumps while Matt got the belts. Austin interrogated Patterson and Briscoe. Chyna did a very long interview, which if it wasn't real, was the greatest acting job she's ever done, because I never believe anything in wrestling is real, and I believe this interview was. Basically, she talked about being made fun of, being called ugly and a freak, and how by being on the cover of Playboy, it validated her against all the self-doubt from what people used to say about her. She talked about all the movie and TV stars who look so hungry, since that's the in thing to diet down to ridiculous levels because the public wants its heroes to look away. Healthy people just don't look, and it's pick your poison. They all had the same work done she did, but their poison was starving, maybe diet pills and or smoking to suppress the appetite in too many cases. Her poison may not be worse, but it also may be no better. People empathized with her, but when it was over, I was so sad on so many levels seeing her cry. I mean, I'm sure it sold a ton of magazines and that was its purpose. It was absolutely weird to see it on a wrestling TV show in front of an audience that more often than not is terribly misogynistic toward female characters. But it was sad that getting a Playboy cover and that they can market her to where tons of people will buy it is what she considers validation of anything. And even sadder than when she talked of all the hard work she did on her body and she enjoys that people think it's nice to look at. The reality is most of the work done that made people consider her a sex symbol wasn't the work done by herself in the gym, work done by other people doing cosmetic surgeries and giving her fake hair to completely change what she looked like from 3 years ago. It's more the huge implants, having her face redone, and the subject of some great marketing that were more responsible than whatever bodybuilding work and bodybuilding tricks that also to a degree made her unique as compared with other women who have the same work done and go to the gym and train just as hard but do the skinny routine. The Chyna who came to the WWF would never be in that magazine, and the fact that this new Chyna can be says something sad on so many levels. RTC came out and pushed the magazine hard. They really want to break Sable's records for sales. Venus did a hell of a promo. Stratus was hitting on Angle and he, like a geek, didn't notice until she stuck the metal down her cleavage. X-Pac beat Jericho in a first blood match when he hit him with a bottle. Jericho hit X-Pac with nunchucks after the match and X-Pac juiced, then put the walls on the announcer's table. They did a photo montage of Chyna's photos, censored of course. Guerrero beat Venus to keep the IC title. Chyna pulled Richards' pants off and he was running around in his undies. While this was going on, Guerrero schoolboyed Venus. Crash tried to buy drinks at WWF New York, but they acted like he was underage and wouldn't serve him. Ross made a crack about how he shouldn't be drinking, which was an inside joke because he got into trouble and was fined for that very thing. Regal came out and read Shakespeare until Austin gave him a stunner and left. I can't say why, but I thought this, for a silly segment, was awesome. Between Regal's delivery while reading, the timing of Austin coming out, and Regal's selling and incredible facials, I don't know how it could have been done better. Main event was Rock pinned Benoit to keep the title in 7:28 when Triple H snapped Benoit's neck on the top rope and Rock used the rock bottom. Shane was in Benoit's corner and he interfered freely. Stephanie also came out. After the match, Benoit and Angle laid out Rock and Triple H. As Angle was putting the boots to Triple H, Stephanie slapped him in the face. He stopped and did nothing. Benoit then out of nowhere headbutted Stephanie, which got a huge pop. Angle left with Benoit without caring for Stephanie. After the TV show ended, they did a 3 minutes match with Rock and Triple H versus Angle and Benoit, ending with Rock and Triple H winning after a simultaneous people's elbow. Highlights from the September 26th SmackDown tapings in Pittsburgh. For Heat, Malenko beat Taka Michinoku when they went to the finish after Taka suffered a separated shoulder. They had to hold the show up for 15 minutes and Taka went out on a stretcher. The injury seemed worse at first than it turned out to be. Guerrero beat Road Dogg without Chyna at ringside, with the idea being that Guerrero could get a heel reaction without Chyna there. Steven Regal's name is now William Regal, I'm presuming because of Steven Richards, and Crash is no longer a Holly because they don't want any linking of him with Bob when Bob returns. Anyway, they had a match with Regal winning. SmackDown started with Foley running down Austin because he's giving everyone stunners. Benoit demanded another match with Rock. Angle came out to a total gigantic face pop since he's from Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania, which is a Pittsburgh suburb. Nobody expected the pop, and he ran down the local sports teams and they still didn't boo him. He demanded a match with Triple H and ran down Benoit, saying he should be fined and suspended for what he did to Stephanie. Benoit ran down Angle and they were going at it when Foley announced they would be partners for the main event. Lita beat Jackie with Hardys in one corner and Edge and Christian in the other. They gave the guys the night off from wrestling after the 2 tough matches they had the previous nights. Blackman beat Road Dogg when Austin hit Dogg with a chair, so Blackman kept the hardcore title in a brawl that went everywhere. Taz and Raven did a promo with Raven doing his exact same character. Jericho told Raven to shut up. Too Cool and Rikishi beat Tanda and Kane when Kane turned on Test and choke slammed him and then walked out, and Rikishi pinned Test. More Playboy hype with Lawler specifically running down Sable, saying she's nothing compared to Chyna. Raven and Taz beat Jericho and Lawler when X-Pac interfered, allowing Raven to use the DDT on Jericho. Chyna pinned Richards. Chyna stripped down to her bra and panties to try and sell more magazines. Regal complained to Foley about Austin's behavior. Foley said he was going to sit at the entranceway in case Austin tried to interfere in the next match. Austin's no DDQ X-Pac in a title match when Austin came through the crowd after a musical entrance and gave both guys stunners. Foley got in Austin's face but Austin blew by him like he didn't care. Angle and Benoit beat Rock and Triple H when Rock had a chair, but Stephanie stopped Rock from hitting Angle. Rock was distracted by Angle, hit him with the Olympic slam and got the pin. Total face reaction for Angle pinning Rock. Stephanie was cheering for Angle getting the pin. After the match, Rock and Triple H did the same thing as at Raw, leaving the heels laying with stereo rock bottom and pedigree and both doing people's elbows. SmackDown tapings on September 19th in Milwaukee opened with everyone around the ring. Foley said he was going to find out who ran over Austin. Everyone started blaming everyone else. Foley blamed Rock, who said he didn't do it. Then he blamed Triple H, who said he didn't do it. Triple H blamed Angle. Angle blamed Essa Rios. Angle then blamed EX. X-Pac then blamed Jericho. Jericho said it may have been Stephanie. Stephanie said she wasn't even there that night, although they then showed footage of her helping Austin after he'd been hit. She blamed Undertaker. He called her a tramp. Then a battle royal started with everyone. Venus beat Too Hottie when Richards interfered right in front of the ref. RTC left Too Cool laying. Triple H and Stephanie were back together and Triple H didn't even sweat when Angle sent Stephanie flowers.
Edge and Christian were acting like movie critics watching backyard matches. Now kids, you know you should never do this, even though, like, half our guys did it, of the Hardys.
Hardys ran in, but Matt got the sandwich chair to the head. Blackman beat Snow in a hardcore match where everyone without a program ran in and Blackman pinned Michinoku. Shane returned and said he'd help Austin find the driver and would reveal it. Triple H asked Stephanie about Shane, saying he was alone at the hospital when Stephanie had said she was with him. She said Shane had suffered a head injury and just didn't remember.
Jericho and Lawler beat X-Pac and Taz via DQ when Taz was hitting Lawler for the strap in a lame finish.
Taz choked out Lawler after.
Chyna threw a hissy fit backstage.
Eddie tried to give her flowers but she attacked him with the flowers. Guerrero cried and to show he was over it, showed the Playboy cover on the big screen. She hugged him while the fans booed.
Rikishi came out and told Chyna she should dump him.
That's what friends are for. He showed footage of Guerrero causing a scene at the Playboy mansion. Chyna got mad but Guerrero got on his knees and proposed. Chyna said yes, they hugged and the crowd booed like crazy. Acolytes beat Goodfather and Buchanan. RTC beat them up after until Too Cool and Dudley's came out, and when they finished, everyone, including the Acolytes, danced. That must have been a rib on Bradshaw.
Undertaker and Rock and Triple H beat Kane and Benoit and Angle. They didn't even try to explain why Rock and Triple H would be teaming already, nor did they tease any problems.
Angle collided with Stephanie and Triple H rolled him up for the win. Angle laid out Triple H after the match and pounded on him with a sledgehammer, then gave Stephanie a kiss. He then asked Triple H to ask his wife if he kisses like a pansy. They are targeting Big Boss Man's return from arthroscopic knee surgery as about October 9th.
Lita has a jammed toe but hasn't missed any action.
Bob Holly's scheduled return from a broken forearm in early November while Tori's return from shoulder surgery looks to be mid to late November. Billy Gunn will be sent to Memphis to get his timing and conditioning back before making his TV return. He's expected back at TV this week, but may only be used in a dark match just to check on where he's at. Nora Greenwald Mona is now planned to be sent to Memphis and work a program with Bobcat in a few weeks.
Davey Boy Smith wants to come back, but at this point there are no plans to bring him back.
Foley was speaking at the University of Missouri Journalism School this week. At this point there are no plans to use Michaels as a wrestler, nor has he contacted WWF with ideas, but WWF has heard the rumors. It would make logical sense that if he was going to do a comeback that he'd want it to climax at WrestleMania with a retirement match since it's in Houston, but at this point that isn't in the plans.
Austin is scheduled to wrestle on the October 22nd pay-per-view.
Steve Bradley has been transferred from IW Puerto Rico, where he held the tag titles on several occasions, to Memphis.
Now they are hoping Big Show can get down to a legit 375 pounds to return for the Royal Rumble.
Considering WWF has been on the USA Network from day one, and a focal part of the network's growth since 1984, it was amazing to see the final Raw and then the final show ever with heat before the pay-per-view come and go without even a retrospective. The final heat was so much business as usual with the pay-per-view upcoming that it was almost eerie to think this company and this TV station, that practically synonymous, could have such an anonymous and forgettable televised ending. Terry Boatwright will be taping the UPN show Freedom starting at the end of the month. The big guys who played the security guards at the Playboy Mansion were actually two guys from UPW in Southern California. Mick Foley will be taping Mad TV at the end of October.
WWF stock will be moving from the NASDAQ to the New York Stock Exchange under the listing WWF starting on October 25th. SmackDown is now being shown in St. Louis on KPLR TV, the local WB affiliate, at 7 p.m. on Saturdays. KPLR TV is the station that put the old wrestling at the Chase on the map, running Sam Mushnick's TV show in from 1959 to 1982 and continued to broadcast wrestling with the WWF through the late 80s. In Forbes magazine's list of the 500 richest men in the United States, Vince McMahon with his stock value of WWF cracked the list for the first time at number 260, with a worth of $1.1 billion. Ted Turner was number 25, worth $9.1 billion. Yet another murder was tied to watching WWF wrestling, this time in England.
The London Daily Express ran a story on September 19 about an independent inquiry into a murder when a 6'7" 18-year-old mentally ill and deaf teenager beat to death a 57-year-old woman by jumping up and down on her chest, dragging her around by the hair and hitting her in the head with pieces of furniture. He also severely injured a second woman. Barrister Jane Mishcon, who chaired the inquiry into the murder and second assault, concluded, "The World Wrestling Federation have a part to play in this tragedy. The attack mirrored the choreographed actions in WWF wrestling, but to perpetrator Daniel Joseph, they may well have seemed real." Joseph was first admitted to the psychiatric unit as a voluntary patient in 1996 after getting into arguments about pro wrestling. He had shown no previous signs of violence. Joseph was living at the home of the woman he killed, Carla Thompson, who was a good Samaritan who housed many people with drug and drinking problems that she tried to use religion to cure. She encouraged Joseph to stop taking his medication and rely instead on prayer to cure his mental problems. Correction. Apparently WWF is going to be able to keep the Sunday Night Heat name for the show when it moves to MTV this week. Undertaker pulled his groin, which is not the one he tore that kept him out of action for so long. He was not booked on the house show on October 1st and may be kept off television, or perhaps just out of the ring on television at next week's tapings. Taka Michinoku suffered a shoulder separation, which is the same shoulder he separated in the past, at the September 26th SmackDown show. There is a lot of talk of breaking Edge and Christian up into singles wrestlers. Unless they put a rocket under the light heavyweight division and use Christian as the focal point of it, he may get lost in the shuffle with a breakup, which would be too bad, being the team was one of the most entertaining acts in the WWF of the past several months. We're told the plan is to break them up, but not right away, more when the time is right for singles programs for both. Useless trivia note, IWA Puerto Rico referee Murtillo is a former early 70s WWF jobber from Puerto Rico who wrestled under his real name of Thomas Marin. Both Billy Gunn, actually at one point the top candidate, and Big Show were considered for the driver spot. Show because it fits in, since he actually won the title as a fill-in for Austin the day they shot the Angle. Gunn was clearly designed as the driver when the Angle was first show. The feeling is that Gunn may not be ready for that high a position and did nothing to prove himself the first time they broke him off as a single, which resulted in that quick reuniting of the Outlaws out of nowhere. With Show, the problem would be it sends a bad message to talent, since the feeling is by letting himself get out of shape, he shouldn't be rewarded with a program with Austin. Within wrestling, the name most feel it'll end up being is Foley, and they certainly tease tension with Austin and Foley on TV, which kind of makes me think it won't be him. To me, McMahon is in Vince, is still the best candidate for the spot for Impact in history, but it would be better to use the spot to elevate someone like a Jericho who is kind of sitting there waiting for a big program. Lawler and Stacey Carter, Kat, will be married on September 29th in Las Vegas, which doubles as her 30th birthday. WWF is now running a Spanish-language version of Metal on Telemundo nationwide on the network, the second highest-rated Spanish-language network behind Univision in the U.S., from 7 to 8 p.m. Saturday nights right after soccer, which is considered a pretty choice time slot that WCW had and lost due to lack of care, leading to weak ratings. IWA, which has WWF affiliation, is on Telemundo stations in Tampa and Orlando on a 13-week tryout, which is a completely separate deal. UK ratings for this past week saw Raw with 340,000 viewers, SmackDown with 220,000, Superstars at 90,000, Metal with 70,000, Nitro with 40,000 and Thunder with 10,000. It is expected Nitro and Thunder will benefit starting this week with the move in England from TNT to Bravo because Bravo has more availability. Austin was said to be a little bit sore after throwing those stunners, but his neck felt the best it had in a long time. Stratus and Venus appeared as presenters on the Much Music Video Awards show in Toronto, which is a Canadian version of the MTV Awards. SmackDown tapings on September 19th in Milwaukee drew a sellout 13,855, paying $396,105. The only weekend house show was September 23rd in Madison Square Garden, which drew a sellout of 19,530 fans, which was 16,952 paid for $530,725, which once again broke the building's all-time record for a non-pay-per-view wrestling event, which only means ticket prices are higher than they were in the past because a sellout is a sellout, and this was number 13 in a row. Raw on September 25th in State College, Pennsylvania drew a sellout 10,271, paying $281,664. Not including the pay-per-view show, the merchandise for the week was $370,586 or $9.02 per head. I'd suspect the increase over the past 3 weeks coincides with the greater TV visibility of Austin. Some notes from the MSG house show. Jacqueline replaced a supposedly injured Stratus with Tanda beating Hardys and Lita when Stratus interfered, tripping Lita. Edge and Christian beat Dudley's when Edge hit Bubba with a tag belt. but after the match, Christian got put through the table. Lawler and Cat vs. Taz and Ivory was a disappointment with surprisingly little heat. Jericho and Rikishi beat Guerrero and X-Pac when Jericho pinned Guerrero with a small package. Main was Rock and Triple H and Undertaker over Angle and Benoit and Kane when Rock pinned Angle after a rock bottom. They teased a little tension between Rock and Undertaker, but none between Rock and Triple H despite their history. At one point Stephanie, who was a babyface in this match in the face corner, which also makes perfect sense considering recent TV involving Undertaker and Rock and her, jumped on Angle. Angle threw her down, but then acted like he didn't mean it when seeing it was Stephanie. A funny thing on the show was when Edge and Christian ripped on Patrick Ewing, expecting to be booed, everyone cheered them. Even though it was a sellout, a lot of people with tickets didn't come as there were a lot of empty seats in the lower level. The readers' pages. Madison Square Garden. Regarding sellouts in Madison Square Garden, you missed a few sellouts before the Edward Carpentier vs. Argentina Rocca match. On February 4, 1957, Rocca and Vern Gagne vs. Hans Schmidt and Karl von Hess. March 11, 1957 for Rocca vs. Schmidt and March 30, 1957 for Rocca and Perez vs. Don Stevens and Jackie Fargo. Rocca vs. Carpentier was September 16, 1957. The next show, on October 15, 1957 with Rocca and Perez vs. Killer Kowalski and Dick the Bruiser, was just shy of a sellout. I'm nitpicking a bit, but the 5 consecutive sellouts you refer to in 1962, there were actually very few empty seats in the far reaches of the upper corners. I lived in the Garden from the late 40s through the early 60s, and after a 2-year hiatus due to Uncle Sam, through most of the late 60s as well. From then on, it was one of my blue periods with a who cares attitude. As much as I cared for Bruno Sammartino, I fear his ego took over at times. He certainly was a superpower at Madison Square Garden, but his claims as far as how many this and how many that are absurd. He had more than his share of sellouts, but let's not forget the bombs he headlined. Yes, television exposure, and the lack thereof, contributed to their failures, but the entire period from 1967 to 1969 was a financial disaster at MSG. They couldn't even sell out the farewell show at the Madison Square Garden on 8th Avenue or the debut show at the new venue at Penn Plaza. Of course, better days were on the horizon. I enjoy your work and found you studying of MSG and the findings very informative. Fred Hornby. Port Washington, New York. Michaels. I just got finished watching the Shawn Michaels shoot interview produced by RF Video. I'd highly recommend this video to anyone who enjoys the sounds of ass flapping because that's exactly what Michaels talks about during the course of this discussion. The video is tremendous for historical purposes, but lest anyone think that Michaels is on the up and up with regards to his description of Montreal needn't look any farther than his ruminations caught on this video. I would pay good money to get one of those doctors you find on news programs who can analyze when someone is lying by observing their facial movements, speech and mannerisms. This becomes especially prevalent when the inevitable questions about Survivor Series 97 are asked. Watch Michaels divert his eyes from both the camera and the interviewer when asked simple questions. With a lot of the questions, he seems to suffer from Reaganitis during the Iran-Contra affair because he doesn't remember, which is surprising considering he was involved in what was probably one of the single most important events in the history of pro wrestling. Often, he'll take a long pause and stare into space before answering a question so he can concoct a safe answer in his mind. When Survivor Series 1997 is first brought up, he goes off on a 5 to 10 minute tangent while the wheels silently turn in his head and he calculates his next answer. Like a political spin doctor, he talks a lot about the incident in Montreal while really saying nothing at all, and when it's over, perhaps even raises more questions than he answers. One pseudo-interesting thing he does note is that the Wired Heart privately met with him after his talk with Vince McMahon on Wrestling with Shadows. Michaels claims, even though the interview never accused him or anything, that this audio footage would prove his innocence on the matter. How? What would we have heard? That Shawn thought it was going to be a disqualification finish? That he thought it was okay that Brett didn't want to drop the title in Canada? We would have heard the same old story except without the benefit of the video camera that shows Michaels is either a liar, a half liar, or only giving us the tip of a very large iceberg. Everyone has debated forever whether or not the whole thing was a work and who knew what and when they knew it. Nobody knows. Unfortunately, neither Hart nor Michaels are unbiased enough to shed any sort of realistic, impartial light on the situation because they both have images to maintain, previous stories to stand by, and in facets of those stories to hide. We might chalk this up with the JFK assassination and just figure only the shooter knows for sure. I'm surprised that nobody has brought up that in Wrestling with Shadows, one of the protesters in the Canadian parking lot said, If Brett goes, we go as none other than Jason Sensation. Seems odd that someone so voluble about sticking with Brett no matter what would only months become an employee of the WWF. Sean Gorman, Boston, Massachusetts. Playboy. I'm uncomfortable with the fact the WWF is letting China pose nude, not because I have any problem with Playboy, but because I think China and the WWF are ignoring a big factor. China is not looked at in the same light by the WWF audience as the rest of the women. She's not portrayed as a character whose major purpose is to be eye candy. Rather, she's a major character who commands respect in the storylines. As a result of being presented as an equal to men, she has both young male fans and female fans. I was a counselor at a day camp last summer for elementary school-aged kids. Not only did the girls watch the WWF, but they had a character they identified with: China. While the boys would pretend to be Rock or Austin, the girls would pretend to be China. I think the WWF is sending a bad message to China's younger girl fans by having her do the pictorial. She was the only strong female character who wasn't a heel that young girls could get behind. By allowing her to pose nude basically offsets all the progress they have made. In my opinion, it sends a message to young girls that even the strongest woman is still just another sex object in a man's world. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, though. This is the same company that encourages young boys to chant "Save the Hose." Scott Shapiro. Orndorff. I was at the HSBC Arena for Fall Brawl. Paul Orndorff's collapse was honestly terrifying, not just from watching him go down and stay down. Not just from watching the performers seem so relieved to break character and check on their fallen co-worker/teacher, but from listening to the buzz in the audience as the fans tried to figure out if it was a work or a shoot. Naturally, the loudest and haughtiest voices were those assuring everyone in their section that it had to be fake because nobody else was touching him. Has every smart turned into a jaded, uncaring jerk? I'm surprised there hasn't been more outcry from the Buffalo sports media that after a road loss, a posse of players hurried home to appear and get physically involved in a wrestling show. Doesn't look like they took snapping their undefeated season too hard, does it? Why on earth would WCW expect retired Jim Kelly and injured Doug Flutie to show up? Given that it was a Sunday during the season, they were lucky to get anyone. Is it my imagination, or is this the first pay-per-view with scripted involvement of pro athletes during their regular season? During the scaffold match, it seemed the only way Medusa could have landed with more padding would be if she'd have fallen on her front instead of her back. Drew Bernstein. Response from Dave Meltzer. By promotions working the audience with fake shoots, it has created the atmosphere that nobody wants to believe anything for fear of being a mark. It doesn't make people in the audience jerks, although many are, or uncaring, which probably most really are, but a product of what they've been taught. You know, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Hall of Fame. Big Daddy Shirley Crabtree and Great Gama are probably the two most controversial omissions from the Hall of Fame in my opinion. On your Ayata show, you said, "I don't even want to think about that one," when referring to Big Daddy and the Hall of Fame. It seems to me that Crabtree has good credentials. He was the biggest draw in United Kingdom history, becoming a main eventer in the early 50s, becoming the biggest star in the country by the 60s and remaining the top star through the late 80s. That's an extremely long time to be on top. At the height of his career in his feud with Giant Haystacks, 10 million people would tune in to watch the matches. That's about the same number the most watched cable matches of all time in the United States have drawn. Even more amazing, that was more than 1/6 of the entire population of the UK as viewers. That same percentage of the US population would be about 45 million viewers, a figure that has never been reached in the US. You have Bert Asarati in, since he was one of the first huge stars from Britain. On that basis, since Crabtree was an even bigger star, monumentally more well-known than Asarati, it seems he has good credentials. He was an unbelievably atrocious worker, which may have something to do with his omission. The other big omission is the Great Gama. I'm not sure how much you know about him, but I find it bizarre that Dara Singh is in but not Gama. Perhaps the fact that Gama isn't on record as ever having worked any matches comes into play? But then again, Frank Gotch and William Muldoon are in, and they worked a very low percentage of their matches to the best of my knowledge. Gama retired, supposedly undefeated, with more than 6,000 matches, which is pretty impressive. He also beat two of the top wrestlers from the Western world, Ben Roller and Stanislaw Zabishko. He beat them both decisively and also defeated top champions from Europe. He was a national hero in India. If it wasn't for India and Pakistan's embarrassing neglect toward their old sports heroes, he would still be remembered as a legend today. I really can't understand why he's not in. Justin Crest. Response from Dave Meltzer. Being that there is no way to have consistency in something like this, I think the deal with Big Daddy has to do with just how little respect he had among the wrestlers. Many credit him with the demise of British wrestling. Whether true or not, I wasn't living in England when it went down. He's basically seen as the brother of the promoter, as you wrote, a poor worker, who was pushed to death. From a pure name recognition standpoint in his country, he probably would belong, but only for name recognition. Gamma probably isn't a mission. So much of the turn of the century wrestling is based on myths, but certainly experts from that period always listed him as one of the greatest. I'm writing in regards to Mexico being underrepresented in the Hall of Fame. I believe Diablo Velasco, Black Shadow, Karloff Lagarde and Tarzan Lopez should be added. Black Shadow is the weirdest case since Rayo de Jalisco Sr. is in, and Rayo wasn't the draw or worker Shadow as, especially since he was a lazy drunk who did nothing after he became a main event guy. Rayo was a huge attraction, but it should be noted that El Santo and El Solitario were his regular tag team partners. Shadow was one of the two guys in what is still considered the most important match in the history of Lucha Libre, and is also credited with being the father of the high-flying style that Rayo Sr. and Solitario patterned their careers after. When he lost his mask, it was thought that his star power would fade, but then Lucha started to get on television and the cameras added a new dimension to his high-flying, and his main event career was extended a few more years. Lopez was the first serious money draw in Mexico, an excellent performer and the top man in Mexico until Santo and the generation of masked wrestlers took over, and even until his retirement he was considered a top guy. He was named Wrestler of the Year in Mexico 3 times. As for Lagarde, I don't know what reasons were stated for him not to be included. He became a big star at the same time Rey Mendoza did. He made tons of money as by the early 60s he was rich, had several properties, 3 or 4 cars and a petrol business. It is also said he was the best worker of the Mendoza and Lagarde and Rene Guajardo trio, even though he was a natural welterweight, so he usually looked small. Still, he was a main eventer in just about every arena he competed in. He was also a key player in the success of Guajardo, who was a second match wrestler until Lagarde took him under his ring and elevated him to main event status. He didn't get as much credit as Mendoza and Guajardo because he retired earlier and didn't have the huge money matches in the UWA during the early 80s that Mendoza and Guajardo had with Pero Aguayo, Abdullah the Butcher, Solitario, Fishman, Los Misioneros and the Japanese guys. Either way, his longevity as a main eventer and his credentials as a good worker make him a legitimate Mexican Hall of Famer. I would put him in long before even considering Alfonso Dantes. What about Francisco Flores? That's another obvious choice. Maybe even Huracan Ramirez, believe it or not, was a bigger star than Santo in some Latin American countries. Jose Fernandez. Ken Patero was a main event wrestler for 15 years. He was on top from the beginning of his career until well into the 80s. He headlined with Bruno Sammartino, Pedro Morales, Bob Backlund, Andre the Giant teamed with John Studd, headlined St. Louis, Madison Square Garden and every territory he appeared in. Why isn't he even on the radar screen? Despite having no wrestling background and starting his career at the age of 30, he learned how to work. He had a match with Bob Backlund that won Match of the Year, and a match with Backlund that was as good a scientific story match as I've seen. He headlined sold-out major arenas. Why doesn't that stuck up to Mick Foley, who really only had a relatively small run as a main event draw? Don Mattingly will never be considered for the Hall of Fame, and he dominated for 6 years due to his lack of longevity. Patero was a legitimate athlete who thrived as a worker and it easily puts him in the same class as many already in the Hall of Fame. Jeff Bookants. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine,